This is Captain Albert Wesker of STARS Alpha Team, and you're watching Let's Talk Resident Evil.
What is going on, everyone? Anthony here, and welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Resident Evil podcast. And I have a very special guest. This is something I've been trying to get together for a while now. We've been in communication, talking, and I have Shaun here. And this is a great opportunity. You might know Shaun from his work over on the Carrier, a Raccoon City Story channel on YouTube. And thank you for taking the time to come on the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me and the opportunity to talk with like-minded people about all things Resident Evil and all other stuff too. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like one of those things where, I always love, like, especially when it comes to different franchises, to get a chance to talk about certain things, because obviously, like, Max Payne being something we both have in common of what we love, and the fact that you kind of blended Max Payne with Resident Evil is like, it kind of blows my mind in that style, where you have the way it's told, the way the story's told in this, like, graphic novel type way. And I just want to, like, kind of pick your brain about that in terms of, like, when you started to kind of get into Max Payne or Resident Evil, which one came first? And I guess where your love of gaming started. Was it because of those franchises or series, or was it something else entirely?
So let's dial it back all the way to, I guess, year zero, or from the surface level of things. Yeah, I've always loved gaming since I was a kid. I wouldn't call myself a hardcore gamer nowadays, but back then you just got a console and you play the games and you just enjoy what came out next, depending on what the console that it was that you had. So at the time, I grew up in a little suburb here down in South Florida, and we didn't have a console until maybe about 95 or 96. So at that point, it was always going over to the friend's house who had the Super Nintendo and the extra controllers, and we played some, Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. That was my first go-to. That or Super Mario, whichever the games they had. I think Super Mario World, whichever one had the bazooka, which blew my mind. I never used the damn thing. I still don't even know what game that one was meant for, but I just remember wanting to like carry it around, even though it wasn't plugged in. And then me and my older brother, we were Nintendo kids, so we had a Nintendo 64 growing up because, GoldenEye was pretty much the top dog of the market at that point. I want to say that was like 97, 96. So yeah, we had the N64 and just always had video games growing up. And it wasn't until we had one of our friends down the road who had the PlayStation in the neighborhood that we always go to his house to play the PlayStation games, which always felt like they were kind of just, they had their own thing versus what Nintendo didn't have. And we'd go there and play whatever games he had, to be like Tomb Raider or Crash Bandicoot or Alien Trilogy, which frightened me as a kid. And then one day he says, "Hey, come over. We got this new game. It's about zombies and stuff." I'm like, "Well, I like zombies. I watched the old George Romero movies, and it's called Resident Evil." And at the time, I didn't know what the hell does that name mean. I don't even know what any of those words mean. I was a kid. I didn't know shit. So we got to play it, and I watched it, that black and white cutscene, and all I could think is, "Wow, it's the cheesiest cutscene ever." But to me, as a kid, I might as well have just been watching like a dramatic, you know, spectacular scene. It spooked me, it captivated me, and everything about it just screamed awesome. Their uniforms, the premise of it, the action, the violence, and everything, and the cheesy like action movie music that was playing as they're doing the title screens. I was sold on it, and it was a terrifying game. You're playing as a super trained cop with this awesome body armor vest, and you're in a mansion in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by things that want to kill you, and you have barely to no weapons whatsoever. It just stuck with me, although I didn't beat the game until maybe like 2 or 3 years later, because I could only play it for about 15 minutes at a time, because I would run out of ammo and I was too scared. So dialing it back a bit, yeah, Resident Evil was the first game that I was exposed to out of that I actually really, really had a deep affinity for. Before that, it was maybe just GoldenEye, But GoldenEye was GoldenEye. But this is the first game that had a story that really was a story in its own thing.
That's really cool that that was part of your, like your friends kind of telling you about it. Because similar to the last episode where we talked to Perry and kind of his experiences of, being in the '90s and stuff like that. I think it's really cool that there is that kind of like, hey, did you hear about this? Like just hearing stuff about it was a different,
Yeah,
it was in a different form of like magazines or just seeing, renting it obviously, or seeing the box art and being like, what is that? Very similar to how like I found out about a bunch of movies, right? Like just through the video store, or talking about it with friends. And Resident Evil kind of being, baked into our brains early on when we were like, kind of seeing the different, you're like, holy shit, like this live action thing is pretty cool. It's very different. The live action intro, for example, which is like classic at this point. And then you look at like the way that it was throwing you into this isolated mansion where your resources are limited. It's not just something that is very, easy. Like some people say nowadays, like games are too forgiving or there's so many modes. Like back then it was like you were just kind of thrown into it unless you had
yeah,
like a guidebook or something. Like that was the only thing, which, that's what my dad would always get. It was the guidebooks, because he didn't like to get stuck on the games. But like if you didn't have one, like you would just have to figure out with your friends, like, what do we do? Like, how do we get this puzzle? Like, where do you go from here? That's really cool that you share that younger experience, like when you're going through probably one of my favorite eras of gaming. Obviously PS1 is like my favorite. I love the N64 as well, but like that, just the early days is something that I always love talking with people about. Cause like, I just think it's just part of that simplicity, and they were trying, that competition was there. Like you said, like PlayStation was trying to do stuff that N64, like, it was getting that stuff on the disc that the cartridge couldn't achieve. And then all of a sudden they were like, well, guess what? We got RE2 on the N64, like they did things like that where like, I don't know. I just like that competition back then seemed like there was actually that push and pull, where today it just seems more of like the same. And it's just like, okay, but I think that's really cool that you have that connection there. Now, when you were did you get like a PS1 later? Like, were you completely sold? Like, were you like, yo, I got to get this PlayStation now to check out the other games?
no, I ended up never getting a PlayStation. We
Wow.
stay so with Nintendo, and so that's the funny thing. You mentioned strategy guides, and this is actually how I got turned on to not just S.D. Perry's books, but just reading in general. I don't know what kids today usually think, but when I was a kid, it was just totally that no kid wanted to read. I'm not gonna sit down and read a book. I got TV. I want to watch TV. The last thing I wanted to do was read any kind of word. So when I was like second grade, I was a terrible reader. I just didn't want to sit down and commit to the work at all. So for me, the way to play the games was I would go out and actually buy the strategy guides because I would read it and I would find the story from that in between all the directions and tricks and tips that you would do. Didn't really understand much because I would only look at the pictures. But then it wasn't until I walked into like a Barnes and Nobles around '98 that I went to and again, I would go there just for the magazines, for the comic book side of things. And I stumbled across I guess it's their sci-fi section at the time, and it had all the Star Wars novels, which I kind of like Star Wars because it had Harrison Ford and I loved Han Solo.
Of course.
And I see before the S sections are Resident Evil, and it's the first Umbrella Conspiracy novel, and I just pulled it out and looked at the book, and I thought, they're making books of this now? I don't care. I want to buy this. And my intention was to buy it and just stare at the cover because I was like, I don't know if I'll ever read it, but you know what? It's Resident Evil. I'll read it. And because of that, I learned how to read because it was a Resident Evil book. And like, well, I guess I got to start reading books now. And
Wow.
it was through the novels that I learned how I essentially played the games, with the exception of Resident Evil 2, because at that point I had a PC, so that's how I played the first three games. Not in the same order, but I had moved down to Brazil, and then when we came back up here for vacation to Florida. I got my first copy. My first ever Resident Evil game was Resident Evil 2 Platinum for PC.
Wow.
Man, I played the shit out of that thing. I learned the ins and outs. It was like the back of my hand. I got all the, I saw that's the game that came packaged with the concept art from 1.5, and I had no idea what I was looking at. It was just cool pictures, and I played that game till like for it felt like an eternity, but it probably was a better part of a year. And then after that, I managed to obtain like a pirated copy of Resident Evil 1. And then I was in a flea market in Bahia, Brazil, just looking around as a kid on the beach, and then there it is, this faded printed CD disc of Resident Evil 3 for PC. And I got that probably in like around the year 2000. But before then, I'd read the books, and that was the only way I played these games, which worked because I could take the books to school, and everyone's like, "Sit down, read a book." Well, I'm not reading a book. I'm playing the fucking game. That's what I'm doing here.
Yeah. Wow, that's actually really cool. I did not know that was kind of your entry was reading through the guides. That's very interesting. And that also kind of and that was like how you got into, the actual concept of like, sitting down reading. Like I remember when I discovered the books, it was like, oh man, it was probably like, I want to say probably maybe 2006 or 2007, but I was probably in, middle school at the time, for me, because I'm younger than you. But I remember getting, again, Borders books, and I remember just seeing Resident
Books.
Evil, and I was like, wow, I just saw the spine along with the other ones. They had a bunch of them, and I was like, what is this? And then it says the Umbrella Conspiracy, and I see the front, and I'm like, okay, this has to be the first game, because you see the zombie, you see them standing in the field. But I remember like one of the first like book reports that I did in school was I used that. I was like, Resident Evil. I was like, maybe I can get away with this, maybe, right? Because I already know. I was like, I read it, I knew everything, and I did that. But again, it was kind of what you said about like bringing out the book of like, all right, got to read your books. Like that's like one of the things. Like I would just use the novels as like, so I can actually kind of, shut off my brain and like be immersed in this story while I'm like, sitting here in school being, miserable, because obviously like no kid wants to stay in school for that long. You want to go out and hang out with your friends or play games or something, you know what I mean? But like that was a cool, that's kind of funny when you said that, and that's very fascinating that's how you kind of got into it and playing that. Do you still have your RE2 Platinum box? Because I think
Absolutely.
yeah.
The box, no, but I have the CD. I still have the
Okay.
CD. The box suffered at the hands of my 9-year-old self, so when I got the box, it's just we worked through to get the fucking
Oh,
CD.
yeah, yeah.
And but I still have the CD. It's I keep it. It's where I keep the rest of my my discs everywhere. But I still got that thing. It's worn, but on it you can open up and there's still the Toy Biz magazine action
Yes.
figures, and then there's still the sweepstakes call-in number or something, or is a a contest. Call in to get a role on the new Resident Evil movie that was announced, which was still, I think George Romero was still in charge of it
Yes.
at that point. And I actually recently I bought it off of eBay. I bought a copy of the old Toy Biz magazine of the issue that came out in '98 that had the first line of Resident Evil toys,
Ah,
and
yes.
it's Chris and Jill on the cover, and you see they got their zombies coming at them. I bought it. I had the poster. It's in my closet somewhere, but I just recently bought that thing, and I got to give shout out to the comic books too, the Wildstorm comics, because those also played a heavy influence on what I'm doing now with the Carrier series, but they were also something else that, in conjunction with the books, that I would read through to understand the story. But at the time I was reading the comics, I still didn't know what I was looking at, so now I'm looking at, we have the quick run through of Resident Evil 1, and then we have the side stories that I'm like, I had no idea where they came from, but it looked cool.
Yeah, and it was just something where like you were so into the characters and the lore at that point. I'm sure you were probably just like, all right,
Hmm.
let me, I'm in at this point. Like I'm invested. So was it
Yeah.
one of those things where were you keeping up with all, like you just kind of went down the line of the S.T. Perry novels as they were coming out? Like you were like, all right, I got to get
Yeah.
the rest of
By the
them now.
time, yeah, when I got turned on to the book, by the time I got the first book, because I didn't buy it the first time I saw it, I just thought like, well, I'm gonna have to learn how to read to see this thing.
Right.
And by the time I started buying the books, I think she had just the more recent one that had come out was either Underworld or Nemesis. But I read through those like that, and Nemesis is my favorite one. And then I got Code Veronica. Code Veronica was again like at that point I thought, well, I'll just wait for them to put the games out on PC.
Yeah.
That's how I'll play
Yeah.
this. And then 3 comes out, and then they announced that Code Veronica is coming out for the Dreamcast. And I'm like, uh-oh. What is that? Does that mean it's harder to put it on the PC? And I just waited. And then, no, there's a PS2 version now. my uncle, my family knew I loved Resident Evil, so my uncle thought he was being a nice uncle. Hey, I got you a present for Christmas. I'm like, oh, okay, what is it? And it's Resident Evil Code Veronica X for PS2. I didn't even have a PlayStation at the time.
Oh.
I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. So I read that manual back and front. And then I thought, well, it says on there it's like a DVD-ROM. So, well, I got a DVD player. That might do something. Put it in. Fucking nothing. So yeah, when I finally got around to learning Code Veronica, is when I got the SD Perry's book on that one. And then the last one she put out was Resident Evil Zero. So that was probably 2003, 2004, I want to say. And at that point, I was already invested in reading the novel, so I did myself the disservice of, well, they got the movies, and they have novelization of the movies. I'll just read those then. So I read the novelization of the last one I read was Apocalypse, and after that, I was like 14 or 15 when I read that, and I could tell like this is shit.
Like, this isn't like what I read in the SD Perry stuff. This is not the same.
No, this is a total downgrade.
Yeah, you had something going off the direct like lore, even though obviously it changed, changed stuff. Like SD Perry even changed stuff, but it was still really like it had the ideas there, and everything was still told in such a great way. Where like the characters and the stuff they started to implement in Paul Anderson's films. While I do like the first three films, I think they're just okay. There's problems with them, but I think they completely missed the mark. And if you saw them, did you read the novelization of the movies before you saw the movies, or did you watch the movies first?
I read the novels. I read the novel after the first movie came out, and
Okay.
just like I ruined my experience with the third remake. I read the book for Apocalypse before the movie came out because I just can't contain myself. And part of me was like hoping what I read wasn't going to be what I saw on screen. Sometimes
Like they
"Eh,
would
I'll get-"
change it, yeah,
Yeah.
enough. Yeah. Yeah.
So honestly, that was one of the more confusing film experiences for me. That was literally, I can remember, that's the only time I walked out of a theater telling myself, no, 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 I liked it. You liked it. You liked it, Sean. It wasn't bad. You liked it. You were hyping this movie up so much. It's based off your favorite game, which you just need to learn to like it. And then time went on, like, no, that was just a garbage movie. But now, in retrospect, compared to everything else since then, it's might as well be compared to like Martin Scorsese's work. 'Cause, it was bad, but it wasn't that bad.
That's the thing too. It's like, yeah, it's like when you're getting it on screen, like when you saw it for the first time. Like I was just seeing Resident Evil 3 at that point being my favorite game because I was just playing the absolute shit out of it. I was like, I am seeing Jill on the big screen. I'm seeing Nemesis on the big screen. Like I don't know. Like
Yeah.
I thought Alice was Jill when I first saw the first movie. Like in that
Same.
first glimpse, you're like, is that Jill? And you thought, and then when you go back and you're like, okay, you rent it, and you're like, all right, I don't know. I don't really know what that was. But, all right, the liquor was cool. The tram was cool. Like, there were certain things that were cool in that movie. But then, yeah, Apocalypse was like one of those things where, and I never actually read, sidebar, I never actually read the novelizations for the films. And I want to get them. I don't know if they're probably worth a lot of money now, but I would like to actually read them and check them out because I've been, so familiar with the films at this point, and that'd be a very interesting, like, comparison between the two, if there's any like significant differences.
There's it's minor differences, more so just in dialogue, and maybe some scenes have a bit more like time behind it, more fleshed out time, so that you can understand actually there's more context behind some of the stuff you see.
Right.
But I mean, it ain't too significant of an upgrade to read. But yeah, I recall what you're saying there about like Resident Evil 3, because obviously, I mean, that's the other thing that drew me to your guys' podcast is Resident Evil 3 is my favorite one out of the entire series to this day. Favorite one. And it resonates with me the most because by the time I started playing that one, I was living in Brazil. I'd moved down to São Paulo, which is it's essentially like Manhattan but in the jungle. And so I was living in a major city for the first time in my life. And as I'm playing Resident Evil 3, I'm looking outside my window and I'm seeing alleys and streets and like that looks just like in the game. It's like I was living the actual environments and the scenarios, and
Wow.
it resonated with me that much more. And then, yeah, like you said, seeing Jill on screen and finally seeing Nemesis on screen, to me, that's like I was mentioning beforehand. I mentally paused the video, when they're on the bridge and Nemesis kills Peyton, and then Jill fires at him. If you think that is the closest that they get to the game, Jill from some far fucking distance shooting at Nemesis, and then all of a sudden Alice takes over. It's like if you just pause before Alice does and just let your mind fill in the rest of the gaps, it's kind of the movie that we wanted to see.
Yeah, that is a good point too, because they did try to like make it the whole Matt story. So because they connected it to Matt, they wanted to just keep Nemi close to Alice
Yeah.
in that sense. But it's like no, but like Alice just steals a lot of Jill's thunder in that movie, and it's just the Alice show. That's the one thing when we went back and reviewed it, I was like, man, this is just the Alice show. Like Jill's flair was taken from that. But I think it's cool that you kind of had different ways of kind of like approaching the material, and you were exciting. It was kind of like you were just kind of unwrapping your presents on Christmas. So you're like, all right, I just want to dive into this,
Yeah.
dive into this little section over here, and then dive in. Like it's kind of like you're going through it in a way where it was a different approach. And I like the fact that it was kind of like you didn't know what you're going to get with each unraveling, and I think that's what's kind of cool to compare the differences between why people liked just to read the books over playing the games, because some people just don't like playing games, or some people just don't like the style of those older games, and maybe they're like, oh, I'll just read it. That you see all different types of fans from different eras, so I think that's always cool to always like pick someone's brain about how they kind of approached getting into it. Now, Resident Evil 3, you mentioned that was like 2000, right? When you checked that out, you were in Brazil, so you're almost living the the Max Payne 3 style. But if the when it comes to Max Payne, that came out in 2001. So where does that infiltrate your life?
So Max Payne was a surprise, fucking out of left field, fucking boom! What the hell just hit me? Oh my god, this thing is awesome. It came out 2001 on the PC. I had no idea about it. I played it for the first time on PlayStation 2. So I ended up getting a PlayStation 2 around 2002. Just a funny story behind that, because I gotta tell it really quick. You know, my dad was never too big on buying the expensive electronics. He's always like, "Well, if you got that, it's good enough what you got."
Yeah, if it
And
works,
so,
then
yeah.
I
So
replace.
2002 is when Brazil was the last time they won the World Cup. So they ended up winning, their fifth World Cup. So everyone, my whole family was in high spirits. My dad was he was happy. My mom pulls me off to the side. She's like, "Hey, he's in a good mood. If you want to try it, now's your chance to ask him to buy you a PlayStation." I'm like, "Hey, Dad, you mind getting me that PlayStation?" He knew exactly what I was doing, but he was still in too much of a good mood. He's like, "All right, let's go to Best Buy." So I got that, and the first two games that I got on that was GTA 3, because I've been dying to play that game. And then I had only seen the commercial for it once, but it was for Max Payne. And I just remember seeing it. It looked cool, and with a name like that, I expected a pretty cool action game. So my expectations going into that game was I thought I was get something along the lines of Dead to Rights. Did you ever play that game?
Absolutely, yeah, with
Yeah.
Shadow and the dog and everything like that. Yeah.
So that game is essentially like, it's an over the top exaggerated version of Max Payne. To me, I thought with a name like Max Payne, this is probably going to be like some corny buddy cop thing, like Lethal Weapon, one-liners left and right,
Yeah, yeah.
cheat. And then I play it, and I was not expecting that to be that dark. Like, metaphorically speaking, just the graphic novel cutscenes aside, just the noir side of things. I didn't know much about noir. I knew like Casablanca and the detective stuff, like the
Sure.
trench coat, black and white. I'd never been exposed to it, as authentically as Max Payne. And when I played it, just how gritty that game was, and how the story was just you're going through some dark places, not just in the city, but in this guy's mind. The nightmare sequences, it was, what the hell was this? I'd never seen anything this written before, let alone the gameplay, which was just absolutely insane and so addicting. But I played that, and I was instantly hooked. It was like I'd wake up early in the morning before school, like, and I would just plan it out. Like, okay, if I go to bed now, I could wake up at like 5 a.m. in school. I gotta leave at like 7, so I'll have a good 2 hours to play it, and I'll just do Max Payne. and it was just so addicting. And the character and everything about that just spoke volumes to my kid brain and later to my teen and later adult life, because that game felt like it was a garage band approach. It was just a developer crew of maybe less than 20 people, like a whole rock band approach. Hey, we don't have anything, we'll do it ourselves. The cutscenes, what stood out for me the most and what made me believe I could do the carrier stuff was, well, for one thing, it's just pictures and Photoshop the rest. Well, I know Photoshop. But then the actors, they literally just hired anyone who was on the staff or even available. The main character, Max Payne. It's well known now that that's the writer for the game. They just thought, well, you're a good-looking guy. You're the
And
face
you're
of the
here.
main character now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we could use you.
And so everyone else was Remedy staff, people that were working there. Okay, you're going to play this character. They went as far as hiring the guy who refilled the soda machine to be just a stand-in for a character. The main villain of the game, Nicole Horn, the main antagonist, that's Sam Lake, Max Payne, the guy who played Max Payne. That's his mom.
I
So
did
that
not know
approach, yeah, so that approach, like, well, I can do that. I got plenty of friends in the music scene who, they're done some crazy things before. Me asking them, hey, do you mind if I just put you in my comic book, is like the most, neutral, subtle thing that they've probably been asked to do. So that was my approach with it, but it was such an inspirational game with everything about it. And then when the sequels came out, I was just hooked at the edge of my seat. When can I get Max Payne 2? Max Payne 2. And Max Payne 3 was, it took me a while to really appreciate that game. But I can tell you that they aren't too far off with their depiction of São Paulo.
I was gonna ask you that because I mean, and us talking about Max Payne, it just brought back like a flood of memories because, let me tell you guys something about Max Payne. If you haven't played it, if people that are listening or watching, like you have to fucking play it because it's always been one of my favorites. And the way that my gateway to it was, my dad picked up a PS2 at launch and he picked that up, that was 2001. So that was a year in to the PS2 over here in the States. And it was like, I just remember seeing it and I was like, this looks insane. I mean, this looks better than anything I've ever seen before on PS1, like anything. I remember there was also a squad-based shooter called X Squad. And that was also a thing that I saw and I was like, oh wow, that actually looks really good. Like the animations look good. But when I saw like the bullet time and I heard the voice acting and the cutscenes, and I was like, this is wild. And I didn't, understand a lot of the stuff at the time, because I went back but like, I just remember just playing the different sections and then my dad would get stuck on, the nightmare where you're walking on the bloody, trail and you're trying not to fall. And, the most memorable thing I remember from that time period was that he cannot get the lasers in the elevator. Like when you're looking up and you're just trying to shoot him, like it's just, I remember like he was trying to do it. I tried to do it. And then I think my cousin came over and he did it. But I just remember like that's my like, and then of course he bought 2 and then I was waiting years for 3. But yeah, Max Payne, I think it got brought into my life with just like, I was like, damn, like this is like dark storytelling. So it's one of like the most dark things that I saw in a game at the time in terms of like the material and how it was being told. And then obviously 2 just like went to another level. Probably the ugliest thing in that game is Vinny Gagniti's face, but we don't have to talk about that. No, that's always a joke between me and my friend. We're just like, Vinny Gagniti's face is ugly, but in a funny way. But no, I love talking about Max Payne because obviously I don't talk about Max Payne on here. I never really have a reason to, so now I'm just like gushing because I'm like, I fucking love Max Payne. And my first feature, like super young, like out of high school, was a fan film of Max Payne. I don't know if you know that, but I did a fan film of Max Payne.
Nice.
And it wasn't good, but it was still just a funny, like, because we loved it so much. Like me and my friend Brandon, like we would always talk about Max Payne. Like I got him into the games later, probably like 2000s, it's probably 2007, 2008, and obviously the third game was not coming out. but for a while because it kept getting delayed. But I was just like, dude, we got to do something with Max Payne, and we actually liked the movie from the 2008. Not that I mean, nowadays, yeah, it's not really that good of a film, but when we saw it initially
Yeah.
as young
yeah.
kids, we were like, this is kind of cool. Let's do something. So our first rendition of Max Payne, which nobody, I mean, I have the access to these files. It's not online, but we went and we shot our own Max Payne film in 2008, the weekend the movie came out, after seeing the movie. Literally the next day we woke up and we're like, all right, let's just get a camera and shoot Max Payne. That was like the early, like, we're going to try to make a film. And then in 2011, when I went back and tried to make a more like a mature version of that, was my attempt at doing that with just like actors and stuff. But it taught me a lesson. It taught me, like, you know, a lot of, you know, when you're making films that young, and like the time that you have is not the time that you have when you're older. So like you take that stuff for granted. But we were filming stuff on weekends only because we would go to school Monday through Friday, and then we would shoot on the weekends. And then it was like, that was it. It was just weekend shoots. And but it was the first time I felt like I was actually putting together like a team, and people were actually down with it, even though it wasn't my own like material. But it was just, I don't know, like Max Payne, just, I love it so much that I would dedicate like an actual, you know, like I would try to make something crappy of it, even if it wasn't anything that was like, you know, special for most people. But it's like, you know, for me, I don't know, it always holds a special place in my heart, along with Resident Evil and Siphon Filter, and like it's just up there. It's just up as the higher caliber of games. And I know a lot of people might not even talk about them as much, but you know, it seems like it happens in a bubble like Resident Evil, where it's like it's super big, it has a big fan base, but like I feel like that's why remakes and stuff, with Max Payne being remade, I think that's why we're gonna start hearing people talk about it again, hopefully.
I hope
You know?
so. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with remaking it, but again, I always feel like remakes kind of like you're opening up Pandora's box there. But Max Payne, it's only 3 games, so then I'm remaking the first two and remake the third one. The only way I could see that, in fact, I could see that might lead to a Max Payne 4. So I mean, that's my kind of positive outlook on it. I will say that I have my thoughts on what Max Payne 3's story should have been, and I think they really dropped the ball on it. It's okay for what it is now.
You're just not a fan of the writing? You think Remedy handled that like better than what Rockstar?
Yeah, it wasn't bad, but it was just like, that is a very much kind of, you were very straying far away from what that character was kind of typically like. Max Payne was very much like, you know, he was focused, he had his vices, and then Max Payne 3, it's like, now he's just this guy who just completely self-deprecates himself all the time. It's like, let's go as dark and gritty as we can without being subtle about it. You know, there's the style, there was an approach that Max Payne 1 and 2 did. If it got dirty for a reason. Whereas the Max Payne 3 game felt like, let's just get dirty for the sake of being dirty. Let's get violent and graphic for the sake of it. You know, so that's why you have, but that's Rockstar for you. That's the Grand Theft Auto makers. But I felt like Max Payne 3, you could have kept it back into the, you know, and still kept it in the New York City location. You had Winterson's son. I don't know if anyone even picked up on this in the second game. Detective Winterson, the person who Max murders. Sorry, spoiler alert for everyone. But she's got a kid, and part of the nuance behind, like, because the first 2 games, what that stood out the most was their influence and draw from Norwegian or Norse mythology.
Yes.
You know, that's why you had your partner was Alex Balder, one of the Norse mythological gods. Valkyr, you know, the Valkyries. Woden, Alfred Woden, that character with the one eye. You know, it's Odin. So they had in the second game, Winterson has a kid who's blind, and there's a whole kind of subtle subplot reference to that kind of, you know, metaphorical language. But the kid's still alive at the end of the second game. So my take was, if you make the third game, spin it. Max has always been the one who's always been on the quest for revenge. Have him be on the receiving end of revenge by Winterson's kid.
You bring 3 and you bring it back to the first one, right? Like a true trilogy. You bring it back to the first one, where this one didn't really go back to anything. It didn't have like,
no.
You know, and so I see what you mean. It seems more like Max Payne 3 is like a standalone, where 1 and 2 is like, it's like this. You know what I mean? So it's like it really it really makes it it does have a different vibe. I think personally though, I think the one thing that I liked about Max Payne 3 was like I think the gameplay was a solid
Mm,
10 out of 10. I thought the whole like the way that they made you take cover and they made it a cover based thing, I think that actually kind
yeah,
of worked. Even though I liked 1 and 2 and how that was style, but I like playing on old school mode in 3 because that's the true, you don't get a second
yeah,
chance. You don't get a second chance to hit that dude in the head to get back up. If you don't have that, if your painkillers are up and you don't get that redeem shot that 3 made so popular, because it was you're so used to it. When you play old school mode, it's like you're done. Like you don't get
yeah.
that shot. So I like that it brought that challenge to it. But I definitely agree that the third game does have a different vibe. I still like 3, but I understand why some people can be like, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
not the same. I think the
But
Hoboken stuff was my favorite.
yeah, but don't get me wrong, man. Three still had its memorable moments, dude. That the airport sequence when that music kicks in, boom, when you're on
Oh
that
yeah,
long,
by
oh, dude,
Health.
that
That
is,
whole
yeah,
soundtrack
by health,
is
tears by
yeah,
health. That soundtrack, that is just a memorable moment. I still put that music on. I blast it, when I'm like doing a long drive or something.
absolutely.
That's a memorable sequence. So it has its sweet spots. It's just, not the way that I would have seen it going. Anyway, I digress from that. But yeah, so that was the Max Payne approach to things. Through Max Payne, that's what got me to love noir and film noir, because I didn't know what the hell is this dark storytelling. There, oh, it's called film noir. Well, if that's what it's like, I want to find more stuff, more stories that are like this, and that's how I got turned on to the Sin City comics and the Sin City movies. The movie trailer for Sin City came out, and if it looked anything like Max Payne, I was sold. Just like for Resident Evil, I played a whole bunch of other games that all you had to do was tell me, "Oh, you like Resident Evil? Well, this game's like Resident Evil," and that's how I got turned on to games like Half Life.
Yeah, you're just like if it's like it, I'm in. Like I'm sold.
Yeah,
Like you're in for the ride, and that's what I liked about that. It seemed like a lot of the games back then just seemed a lot more punchy and refreshing. Like now it's
mm,
like, oh, they get released with all these issues day one, and oh, we need a
yep,
patch, we need that. Like, we remember the era of things just coming out, and that's how they were. And there,
yeah,
obviously there would be a greatest hits edition that would probably fix some kind of bug or something, but it wasn't like nowadays where it would be easy to get lazy. And I think
yeah,
the storytelling in the games that chose to take risks and take that dive and maybe not know how they're going to land or how it's going to turn out, but they took risks. And I
yeah,
think that's what I liked about that. And even the risky storytelling, I really enjoyed that with, them trying to like Rockstar. Obviously, yeah, they had a lot of different games coming out. They had Manhunt, which was like a snuff film game, basically, which I loved.
seriously,
Between GTA and Max Payne and that, I mean, I was all in on Rockstar. Probably wasn't, probably shouldn't have been playing Manhunt, but I mean, I was playing it.
yeah,
It's one of those things where Max Payne kind of fit that, where I always felt a certain like I didn't understand what like I don't know like I don't want to say feelings or sadness like when you're a kid what sadness is and stuff, but like when you get
yeah,
older and you go back and you play certain things and you know what loss is and you have life
yeah,
experiences, it hits
oh
you
yeah,
on a whole different level when you go and approach like something like Max Payne and you go through the story or any kind of dark story that you can relate to, any kind of crazy thing that you might not get, but then it kind of goes about back to like going to the novels and rereading the Resident Evil novels, right? Like after a while, it's like, all right, how am I going to approach this? How am I going to feel about this at the end? And I think that's just something that, again, like some things still do that today with storytelling, but it's very, I don't know, like this era that we're talking about, I think it was very special.
yeah.
The late 90s, early to mid 2000s, like it was just when things were, they just had a different kind of integrity with them, if that makes
It's
sense.
just, yeah, the experiences that you're reading about, if the person writing it is genuine about it, like if they actually experience it to some degree, then it really resonates with you even more. Just like, you know, in the City of the Dead novel, the one that's based on RE2 by S.T. Perry. I read that one when I must have been 10 or 11. So anything that went outside the boundaries of the game kind of went over my head because I didn't know. You're seeing the inner monologues of characters that are like 19, like Claire, or like Leon, who's 21. I don't know at the time, I didn't know what a 19-year-old was up to, what they thought. I just read it and just, okay, that's what it is. It's cool. So when she's describing how her and Chris were night owls, and that they would go out for cheeseburgers at like 4 in the morning. I just thought, oh, okay, well, that's kind of cool. And then reading it back and as a later day as an adult, I'm like, that hits even harder now because I do the same shit. I still do to this day. It's like 3 a.m. Babe, what do you want? Let's get some cheeseburgers. Bam.
Yeah, it kind of like hits you on a different level, and then you also like you start to picture like the characters and what they look like because you played the games now, and then you go
Yeah.
back and you're like, oh, like now I'm picturing like like RE3 Jill, like she's like like thinking about, oh, where will I end up with Carlos? Maybe on like a boat somewhere, like on vacation, like what I mean. Like she has these like thoughts, like you're like that's very interesting that like she would go and talk about that like in her again like in her head, and you're reading this, you're like, damn, this is like just the little flares that S.D. Perry added to that. And I agree. Like, I think there was just something about that, like those novels that just hit so well. Like, I think they couldn't, I think they hired the best writer they could have for that, to kind of take that, interpret it in a way, where nowadays it's like, I don't even know if you could like pull off what she did without it being, too,
No, it's got to be an honest, like ground level approach too, especially like within the moment. You can't be looking at it like, well, I got to tie this, make sure I tie in things here that are gonna fit later down the line, so I have to take that into account what might happen like 3 years from now in the story's narrative. It's just no, and you're living in the moment and you're doing what you do, and that's why I think it goes back to like some of those games back in the '90s. They were great because people making it weren't trying to plot out this whole kind of like Marvel MCU level approach of we got to have this entire universe that things are going to work to. It's like, no, what you're doing is what you're doing now in the moment. It's the same kind of approach I discovered when I would be playing in bands. A lot of the fun times I had playing music were with friends where we weren't planning on having like, well, 2 years from now we're going to have this label. 2 years from now we're going to have this record out. It's like, no, what we're doing is now it's fun. It's great. I don't know if this might even end tomorrow. Doesn't matter. Right now we're having fun. And that's
and
when
you're just doing it, right? It's like
yeah,
you just keep showing up and you're doing it. And I think that's
yeah,
that's awesome. That's also just great things to live by, of just like, just kind of living like, because when you forget about that stuff, you kind of like to live in the moment. You kind of just, you miss key things that just kind of could pass you by and stuff like that. I
yeah.
think that's why it's super important to keep that in mind. And I think that's the one thing I like about, yeah, like things just were what they were, and they didn't have like a bunch of things attached to it. Like even like I was talking to my friend Perry about it too, where he was just like, he's like, the first time I played Resident Evil 1, like we didn't even know it was called the Spencer Mansion. Like it was just the mansion, the house. Like we didn't, like certain things weren't, like it was just getting there. Like that, like they were starting to establish stuff, but they didn't know what they were just doing it, and then it caught fire, and they're like, oh shit, we got to get a sequel. Let's get that city in there. And then obviously 1.5, they scrapped it, came out with the 2 that we got today. But it's just like, I think there is something to that when it was just so like simple, and then it goes back to like what we're talking about like the games being more, just kind of refreshing and punchier with the storytelling, just how it just was. And obviously, yeah, if they had success, sometimes sequels would, stand the test of time. Sometimes they'd be forgettable. You see franchises come and go like that, or sometimes certain sequels might kill it because it's like it didn't do so well, or maybe their ideas just kind of fell flat. But, so this is like early to mid 2000s. You're playing Resident Evil. You're reading the books. You're doing Max Payne. You're playing Max Payne. You're in it. So, like, I want to ask, like, when did you, as far as like content or actually like making something, when was the ideas for Carrier like kind of rumbling around? Was it something that you did have in your head for a while because you kind of loved both things, or like I'm kind of curious like where that started, or was it kind of like a thing where you started to get creative with your music first? Like I'm curious how that kind of evolved.
No, the music started first. And the music took like precedent for quite some time because the music was, right there and real, and then the payoff was instantaneous. So we would meet up. I would get my friends together. We'd rehearse some songs, and boom, we got a show. Either like at a venue or a house party, but it was always a party. And then at the response was always like, wow, that's what the response is from we get when we write these songs together. I'm gonna keep doing this. So I dove headfirst into the music thing for quite some time. So I've been playing music since I was about 17 or 18. I'll do the math on that one later. But yeah, no, by the time I was in like my mid 20s is when I really started to try to take it a bit more seriously with the music approach. And up until that point, it was always just more so, well, yeah, I'll focus on writing good songs and learning the instruments, but it's still an instrument. It's still an excuse to party. So by the time my mid-20s rolled around is when I decided that, hey, let me hone on this, let me do this right, let me put the effort in. And that approach was going strong. And because at that point, I kind of checked out on any of my side interest hobbies from gaming and such. Because around that time, Resident Evil 6 had already come out. That was like 2012. The movies were in the direction that they were at, and I kind of made the decision that, you know what, I don't know who this is for anymore, but this is not the Resident Evil that I grew up with.
It was the dark days of
So
Resident Evil, as I
yeah,
refer to them on the channel.
yeah, I haven't even played 6. Like,
I mean, to be honest, like you could probably just watch the cutscenes, and because I
yeah,
think that's the best part about 6. To be honest with you, is like I think the cutscenes and the graphics is the best thing it has going
yeah,
for it. The writing, though, not so much. But I think you'll get a kick out some of the interactions. But the problem is
yeah,
that, again, like you said, who was it for? The identity crisis kind of sunk in, and even though RE6 sold a bunch of copies and it was a success, fans felt just kind of disjointed. And of course that's like a couple years into when I made the I kind of made a decision of like doing the channel, and so like it was probably the worst time for me to being a like Resident Evil channel when like things were so like just kind of like I just kept going backwards playing the
yeah.
older games and stuff. So I don't blame you when you say like that time period you kind of fell off of that, so you're just like kind of checked out at that point.
Yeah, because
2012.
I was doing the music thing, and that kind of helped me to cushion that blow. Where, well, I didn't even acknowledge that that's the thing I loved so much as a kid. Like I had something else going on to keep my mind off of that, and that was just the music side of things. So I just kept doing that for years, working and playing music. And then 2020 rolls around, and then COVID hits and shuts everything down. So now we're all at home quarantining ourselves. At that point, my life was pretty much like I worked Monday through Friday, and the weekend was there was a show. I'm working at things. I'm drawing graphic design. I learned graphic design on my own for the sake of promoting bands and self-taught for like 10 straight years. So everything I did with my free time was towards music, making designs, making flyers, making merchandise, making promotional material, learning the different ways I can do that, expanding on it, learning from mentors and such, how to do like gig posters, screen printing, all that good stuff. And then all of that just bam, it stopped. We can't go out and play any shows. I have no I can't just sit home and write stuff with nothing to do with it. So that's kind of where things just stopped. And I thought for a while, like, well, I'm sure we all had those moments where we just sat there once we had all the time in the world to think, well, what meaning is there in my life now? Now that the noise is shut off. And the thought that kind of just hit me was, you know what? This is weird, but now that I think about it, not a day has gone by, not a single day has gone by since that first day I played Resident Evil in 1997 that I haven't had something Resident Evil related in my head. Every single day, there's a thought. Gee, that little patch of woods out there, if I squint hard enough, that looks like the woods they were running through. Hey, that street corner, with the street lights set up and the buildings inside and the cars, yeah, that could look like a corner of Raccoon City. Every day, it was always there, and I thought, hey, you know what? That's the most honest thing that I've been in love with since I was a kid. Let me go ahead and revisit that. And then I've always been a creative person, so I'm always open to trying and making things. It's just what comes when you nurture creativity. So my original approach was, you know what? I love the first 3 games, but there's so many plot holes in the story. I want to try and see if I can write a more grounded approach of a story, like write an online novel. Because at the time I was a kid, I used to read fan fictions left and right. It's still up, the fanfiction.net website. I think it's actually as the one that has the longest piece of human literature, which is the fan fiction story of the Smash Bros. From what I
Oh
recall
man.
hearing. Yeah. So I used to read Resident Evil fan fiction all the time. I'm just like, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna write my own novel of Resident Evil, and it's gonna be a grounded approach. I'm going to try to stick to the game's narrative, but explain some of the things that didn't make sense, or write them out and replace them with things that complement the narrative. So the idea was like for Resident Evil 1, how come we have all these multiple attacks around the city of people being eaten by a group of about 10 people? Where do they go? There's 10 people, so there's a zombie. Where do they go? Do they hide in the tunnel during the day?
Yeah, what
Are they
happened?
just,
Yeah.
yeah, what happened? And these people they kill that they leave behind, why are they not reanimating? Are there any stories of these corpses reanimating? So the idea was, all right, let me play with that. Okay, well, how about this? Umbrella's had the town under surveillance for months, and they have cleanup crews. So anytime these reported locations, these crime scenes pop up, they dispatch a team there before the RPD has any chance of doing anything to the crime scene. They collect the bodies, like, hey, no, we have, here's our credentials. We're taking this away for top secret stuff. You can't know. So, they're just keeping an eye on things. And then the other idea was with the mansion. How the hell does something like this highly toxic virus escape from a laboratory like that? And first of all, this is a high-tech laboratory. What the hell is it doing? Why is it built inside of this? It is a terrible form of quarantine procedures there, I must say.
Yeah.
This is a highly toxic virus, and you have no form of like barriers or like anything close resembling blast doors to keep this contained should an outbreak happen. So my idea was, okay, well, let's explain that. The mansion was built in the 60s, so obviously the lab they had there was top of the line back in the 60s. There's also another lab in town. That's Birkin's lab, or Nest 2 if you want to call it that from the remakes. I call it Birkin's lab. So that's the newest lab. So my idea was, okay, they're decommissioning the Spencer laboratory. It's old, it's outdated. They're shutting it down, they're liquidating it and taking whatever assets they can and transporting it from one location to the next. So that makes sense why they don't have these insane security measures in place. They're either old and outdated or they're shut down to make the transition of materials that much easier. And why you don't see there's a lot of people living there because they're slowly, it's a skeleton crew operating essentially. So that's what I was going to explain on that. My fiance at the time was working for the environmental department type situation. So I asked her, "Hey, in your line of work, how would a chemical spill happen? What would make sense?" So I got an accurate depiction of, well, in this kind of situation, probably be transporting hazardous material because the security systems weren't in place. Something happened, the virus leaked, and because they had all security systems old and outdated or turned off, the virus spread like crazy. And that's why the intricate puzzles and the traps, that was the original line of security defense built in the 60s. So that's why it seems all outdated. The reason those traps were established and activated is because the scientists realized, look, that's the only final line of defense we have at containing the spread. It's ridiculous, but it's the best we got. Hide the keys, hide the crests, shut down everything as best you can.
Yeah.
Just things like that. I was gonna write that into a story, and then I went online and checked out other stories just to get an idea of like who's done this before me, what can I kind of learn from, and I kind of noticed that people did better versions of it than I could do. So the idea kind of just tailored away from writing my own Resident Evil novel to writing my own original story. So the name of Carrier, I had that from the start. That comes from S.D. Perry. I forget which book it is, but she eventually went from calling them zombies to infected to virus carriers to simply carrier. And I really liked how more just grounded the term carrier sounded versus zombie. I can't stand the term zombie now. It's too oversaturated.
Yeah, especially
So,
nowadays, right?
yeah.
you know.
So then Carrier went from being a novel to me being like, you know what? I should just not stop trying to reinvent Resident Evil and just make my own original idea. Because, hey, that's what they did. Resident Evil was an idea based from Sweet Home. I'm like, you know what? Let me take that approach. So Carrier was going to be a Resident Evil inspired story told based here in Fort Lauderdale in Florida. The idea was it was going to follow a special detachment force of police that actually exists down here. I think they're called Titan. So it sounds like STARS. It's abbreviated for something. And instead of the Arclay Forest, it was the Everglades. Instead of Alpha and Bravo team helicopters, it's airboats. And instead of a mansion, it's a collection of stilt houses interconnected that is secretly a drug creating kind of like meth lab. But they happen to create this one chemical component that makes people turn into very, very aggressive, ravenous, albeit zombie like creatures.
Yeah.
So I was going to have the whole thing kind of replicate itself, but out in the Everglades. And then I just, at the same time, I think I was just at home one night, just having a drink and played Max Payne. And then the cutscenes pop up, and like, oh yeah, I forgot. I always wanted to be Max Payne. And then it hit. I'm like, wait, it's just panels with pictures. All the effects, that's Photoshop. I know Photoshop. That's it. I'll do a film-noir story set in Resident Evil in Raccoon City. That's it. One by one, it was like a hallelujah moment. It just all fell into place, and that's when I just decided, you know what? That's how I'll do it. I'll make a character. I've always wanted to be a detective. I've always wanted a trench coat. And then the idea was, okay, great, that's it. I'm gonna blatantly rip off Max Payne in Sin City. I don't care how much it looks like a rip off, because that's the point. If you notice it's a rip off, that's exactly what I'm going for. And it's gonna be in Raccoon City because that's something we've never seen before. First of all, the catalyst for that approach was the Resident Evil 3 remake when that came out, because I was so hyped on seeing more of this city. That's really what I wanted to see, was more of Raccoon City shown. And if you weren't going to give us the original locations, fine. Give us new locations, though, because that's what I thought they were doing with, like, Moon's Donuts. So we're not going to get, Grill 13, but instead we got Moon's Donuts. Okay, maybe we don't get certain stories there about what's a video store look like in Raccoon City. We didn't get that. So then I just decided, you know what? I'll fucking do it. I'll tell that side of the story. So all right, what's a red light district in Raccoon City look like? You know, what is what's a news channel look like over there? Fast food joints, all that shit. That was just the selling point on it. And then weave these in between these locations. Weave a narrative story that hits all the marks that like a Max Payne noir story would do, but exists within the narrative structure that the game's established. And if you go back to those early games, you'll find that there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of stuff that's left unexplained. Such as, so the primary basis of this first season of the story is it leads to the formation of stars. And if you look at Star's backstory, it came from as a result of Mayor Michael Warren's Bright Futures 21 plan. And the reason that was put together was to increase the infrastructure of the city, and STARS was formed as a reaction to an increase in domestic terror activities. So I looked at that and I thought, domestic terrorist activities, mid 90s, is perfect. So that's when it just started, just like you take a bucket of water and drop it and watch it spill. All these ideas just expanding out, and how I could tie it into the game's narrative without stepping on any feet or any toes, So that's what I try to do, is I tell the story, but I have all this room for me to provide that narrative, and I'm not contradicting anything.
Yeah, it's like trying to actually have, some explanation or showing different sides of things that you always kind of wanted to see. And I think the way that you, especially, in the first, episode, it was very well done, man. And I think that it was cool how you were able to capture different vibes and, different things of Raccoon City. Like you said, like, how would this look, and how would these characters interact with the situation like this? So you're trying to approach it in a grounded way, and you're doing everything in a DIY way, which I think is also, very fascinating, because I can relate to that, especially when it comes to, like, even when I do like films, it's like, you're doing stuff with a team and stuff, but when it comes to, like, doing a lot of the hands-on stuff, it's a lot of just like, I want to be doing it because I just want to make sure it's as good as I can make it. And maybe that's just part of our, like, Pisces creativity, because we are pretty close in our birthdays. But yeah, we constantly,
fish, aren't we?
Yeah, just making stuff, keeping the creative flow. And but I like the fact that you really did, like, approach it in a way where you're like, how can I do this where I'm paying homage to the stuff that I like, but I'm also, I'm just gonna do this in a way where it still feels refreshing. And I do find that a lot between the sound effects and the way that the lines are delivered and everything, and that it does kind of create those mental pictures that you mentioned, that you were kind of, filling in the gaps yourself when you were reading all of this stuff. And I think that it's very well done with how it's told. And I think that's really cool for people to also kind of, be taken back to the Raccoon City when things were, kind of more simple in the first trilogy of games, so it kind of takes not only the person that's watching the video, but, someone that has a history of, this franchise that it really just it brings you back, and then you can appreciate the stuff that you throw in there, or the Burger Kong billboard or things like that, like little things that are just so it's so cool, and it's simple, but it's that's what I love about it. It's that it's hitting those things that we remember, that brings us back to that nostalgia, the reason that era was so specific. And I think you've really captured it, man, with that first episode that we got. But how long did that really, as far as when you started to get that, put that together in 2020, was that a longer process than you anticipated, or were you like, okay, if I'm going to approach this with my skills, doing everything DIY, I can get it out by this time?
I mean, the first episode I put out was the pilot, the pilot episode, which that takes place in '98, and that's more of it serves as more of a test drive on how I can put everything together. There was no solid commitment to I got to get it up by this time. It was the minute that if I have the notion of something I want to do, and I can put something quick together, and the byproduct, the finished result looks even anywhere remotely close to what I envisioned in my head, then I'm convinced, all right, I can do this. I could have something in my head, a vision, and work on it, and the outcome could look 30% close to what I envisioned in my head. Doesn't matter. It came close to what I imagined. Okay, I can do this. And I know that I will bring that 30% up to 40, up to 50, then all the way up to 100%. So I already felt like right off the bat that I knew Photoshop enough to really make it happen. And when it came to editing the videos together, it's very, very simple, because my entire blueprint was just the Max Payne cutscenes. That to me was the go-to. All right, how do I make this like what I saw there? And all it is just a matter of lining up panels, and the effort goes into the sound effects. And I played those games. I've been in studios damn near half my life, knowing sound balancing out and mixing out audio EQs, making sure one thing doesn't, play over something else and drown it out. I knew that side of that stuff from just coming from playing the music for so long. And all it was a question of is hearing it and having an ear for it and knowing what works. And yeah, when I made that first episode, and it was a process. The first time I really thought that, geez, I don't know if I can do this, is when I did the first line of photos. And that was me by myself in my buddy's guest room, who I got to give him credit on this. So this is essentially sort of a two-man operation. The drummer in my band, he is the one who's been helping me out with more so some of the story writing, but he provides the music. He does all the music. I throw an idea at him, he throws all the music together. So I'm in his guest room, I got the white sheet set up, and I'm setting up the camera on the 10-second delay, hold it, run out, think I got the pose down, hit the button, and then just hold the pose, take the picture. 5 hours later, and my back is killing me. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And this is for one episode. But then I do all the work, I edit the photos together, and the final product is just, no, this is worth it. Keep going. It's always when I see the results of everything working hard on that it's just, yeah, I can do this. I got this.
Yeah, man, that's a really good point. That's how I feel too about just putting together any project or idea. It's once you start seeing it come together, you're like, all right, I could do this. It's you see it visually, and you're like, all right, even if I had doubts about this, I know I can take this on in a refreshing way, and and I'm going to do this no matter what, because even though there's things that obviously get in the way, or there's things that can delay stuff sometimes, or there's things that can make you feel like it's I don't know, is it worth to go through all this trial and tribulations for whatever project it may be? And it's yeah, sometimes it is. When you get across that bridge, you're like, all right, we did it. Look at that work.
Yeah.
And it's I think that's really cool to hear you say that too, because it's it kind of takes out any kind of doubt, I think, that you can have or hesitate as a creator, because you want to make sure everything is up to a certain quality, and you want to make sure that especially if it's your baby, or your project, something you're putting a lot of time into, you want to make it, you want to make people proud. You want to make people proud. You're like, yeah, this is the first. This is the pilot.
Hmm.
Like I'm trying to knock people away with the pilot, and I think you've successfully done that, man. In my opinion, I think you have a really good way of approaching this, and a respect for Resident Evil, Max Payne, and also just like not only the fans, but like how to create it in a way where it's not just like shoehorned in or just something that you just decided to do like out of like because you're trying to jump in on a trend, like you don't even know about Resident Evil, you're just trying to do it. It's coming from an honest place, and I think that like
Yeah.
anyone that watches that can take that away from that, is that like that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, and I mean, you can definitely tell that if you just put some thought into it and just look at the work I'm making and you kind of compare it to how the social media side of things are looking, I don't really do a good job of keeping up with it. But that's because I don't want to feel restrained by the social media side of the things. So, I've had people comment on the videos just like it's the first time I've ever had someone get upset at what I feel is the quality of the stuff because they just, when are we going to get more? You got to keep up with it. People lose interest. Like, well, I made this to entertain. I didn't make this to keep up with the schedule. I didn't make this to hop onto algorithms that will keep my content afloat. I know this. My mentality on this is I'm making this for the people that want to see it, and I could care less if this doesn't fit the numbers of the algorithms game for a social media platform or YouTube. I don't care because if you like it, you're gonna find it. You know, this is meant for the people that I know they're gonna see it because whoever saw this, either they saw it when it was trending pretty popular on a popular level, or they went out of their way to find it. But if you like this, you're gonna find it, and that's exactly why I do this. Is for the love of it, and because it's it's for entertainment, and it's like it's meant for that person who wants to see this stuff.
Yeah, someone that's really going to appreciate the little details, and someone that would look at those references and really appreciate it, and it's just something that you do. Now you mentioned like with putting them out, like you're taking your time. You got another episode that's kind of in the oven that you're working hard to get out, and but when it comes to like I know like with time management, it's hard with like a bunch of stuff going on. But I was going to ask you a little bit about like the music stuff. Like what kind of music are you into? What do you play? Like if you don't mind me asking that stuff, because I'm just so fascinated to hear that you're into that stuff, and I know that probably takes up like a bulk of the time. So like you said, just to be able to do anything, like just even a pilot is like, all right, like got something out, with the time, and just like to not rush it and to not like put a deadline on it is always the best way to do it. It's just like when it's done, and that's why. And then when you see it and you're like, okay, because just from the episode 2 preview, I was like, all right, I could see why this is taking a while. I didn't even have to question it to begin with, but I was like, when you see those previews, you're like, all right, like work is being done on this thing. But when it comes to the band side of things, like what was your? I guess let's just take it back to the beginning real quick. Like what was your gateway into like wanting to actually do music, and like what bands and stuff like that?
So, I mean, that goes back. I mean, if I'm being honest, it goes back to my time just as a kid growing up here in South Florida. My dad's always been a musician. I think he was the only musician in his family as a kid, but he started learning how to play guitar at 12. He's by far, he's first and foremost a country bluegrass musician. So he plays guitar. He plays with his barely ever uses a pick. It's just the fingers, finger picking,
Wow.
and maybe the capo or slide. So that's why I like got my own little steel slide right here that
Oh
I
yeah.
try to play with. But yeah, and to this day, he'll say otherwise. But no matter what, I could come up with any kind of guitar for myself. That guy will always be miles ahead of me. He's just one of those guys that like he just feels through it. It's like an extension of his body. So I learned from him. I had an older brother. My older brother was the first one of us to try to get into music, and he was really into Korn and Slipknot, so he wanted a bass. So he got a bass because he wanted to learn slap bass, and then played for a couple months, and then that thing just sat in the corner collecting dust. I grew up just listening to what was popular on the radio. So when I was a kid, I'd be driving around with my mom in the car, through a little suburban neighborhood in Boynton Beach, and you just listen to what was on the radio, and that was along the lines of like Green Day or the Ramones. That's pretty much where your alternative stuff came from. And so, I just knew those songs when I was a kid. So they had soft nostalgic spot for me. So when I got older and I started getting more into things that allowed me to be around kids I thought were cooler, it was like skateboarding. So I got into skateboarding for quite some time, and through skateboarding and punk rock go hand in hand like that. So I go to skate parks where they would have sides that had bands play. And see all these punk bands playing. I just thought everyone looked so cool. You know, like, oh man, they look like they're having a lot of fun. I want to get in on this. So like they're playing in bands. Like I want to learn. I want to know how to be a band. So around 14, I asked my dad if he could teach me how to play guitar. He taught me the chords. And once I learned the chords, that's when I was like, well, that's all I need. You know, all these punk bands like the
Yeah.
Ramones are simple 4 chord, 3 chord
yeah,
songs. Yeah,
really simple
that's
songs.
all I need. Let me just go in and just thrash away
Standard,
on it.
right?
And
And just be like,
yeah,
that's it.
and I did that for quite some time. You know, I had plenty of friends. We get together in garages, and we had little crappy practice amps, bang out these tunes that were probably just noise earaches to the neighbors. And I didn't join my first real band until I was about 17 or 18. And ended up joining on bass because at the same time, my dad taught me how to play guitar, but I taught myself how to play bass. And I had like a stereo. I did what all my idols did from like, you know, Sid Vicious and Sex Pistols. Oh, we just listened to Ramones records. Turn on the record and I just listened to those Dee Dee Ramones. Dude, it's just straight bass playing. I'm like, all right, I got that. Then I listen to bands like Rancid, where the best bass player ever in that genre of music is Matt Freeman. And I'm listening to what he's doing. It's like metal shredding on a bass guitar. I'm like, well, can't do that, but I'll try to slow it down to some extent. Ended up becoming the bass player in my first band because the bassist ended up getting deported when I was about 2 or 3 practices in.
Oh wow.
So I switched to bass, and it was just magic from then on out. It's just like interact, I network with people, get to know kids, and we're growing from there, you know. And then I started playing in 1 band, and 2 bands, and 3 bands, and all of a sudden, all my free time that I had as a kid into my 20s, I'm in like 6 bands at once. And it's afforded me some really great opportunities. You know, I got to learn quite a bit from just people and how to carry yourselves on live. Some really, really hard work ethic you can find in a lot of bands is because, you know, you're taking your time, you're working 9 to 5, and once you're done, you're dedicating that time with whatever money you made from the band to get some rehearsal time and get a record made, go on tour. You're paying it yourself. You're doing it yourself. I learned
Yeah.
DIY ethic from the older guys in the scene, and I'll always appreciate that because it can filter into other aspects of your life. And it led to just some really other great opportunities too. I joined a band from Miami they were very much like 1970s rock and roll, like Cheap Trick, Joan Jett,
Okay.
and we're opening up for the likes of Leonard Skinner, for the Charlie Daniels band, the guy who made that "The Devil Went Down to Georgia" song.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Los Lobos, the guys who wrote the La Bamba song. So now my
Wow.
dad's coming up to these shows. He's like, "What the hell are you doing opening up for these? Are bands I know. You don't even know a damn song by them. Like, are you gonna enjoy the show or what, man?"
Uh,
And yeah, that really inspired a solid work ethic in my approach. I mean, started off with just it was definitely a party. You know, when you're 19, 18,
yeah.
you're playing the band because
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, you want
You're
to be
trying
the
to
talk
get
of
in
the
on
town.
the lifestyle. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you get a house party going, you're playing. Oh man,
Yeah.
it's like nothing compares.
Right.
But then as you get older, you realize, well, you can't be the old guy at the party anymore. So you gotta start taking this seriously. And yeah, that's when I went back to my dad and just like, hey, can you just really teach me better how to play? And yeah, so from there on, the music expanded, and now I'm listening to more than just punk rock. I mean, it was a while ago I expanded out of that horizon, but you know, I love punk rock. I love bands like my ultimate favorite band is Social Distortion. Just that's when I started getting more of the blues approach to things and getting more into blues artists. You know, like the old time guys like Robert Johnson, Skip James, the kind of dudes that played in during like the 30s or the 40s in Louisiana, the Delta blues, and their only recordings is a worn down acoustic guitar and a single microphone in a wooden shack out in the swamps, and these guys are just playing, and that's the record. And it's like growing an appreciation for that, meeting my fiance who she's back there. We got into ska music that comes with the territory, but then learning like swing music and classic orchestra music, and now we love big band swing stuff. We went out and caught the Glenn Miller Orchestra Band. They have been around since the 40s, and that's a full
Wow.
orchestra. I'm talking like a brass section, woodwind section, and they're playing just like, swing music. Like you got that hip upbeat
Yeah,
speed, and then you
yeah.
got the slow drive it down speed, and yeah, it's just learning from that, appreciating the effort and the skill it takes to do that, but also seeing what they're doing. Okay, I love it. How can we do that ourselves?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just that's where it's kind of come from. And we still have the love for me. Started off just loving like the dirty punk rock side of things, which I think everyone when you're young you like the boisterous stuff. Street punk. I had the Mohawk charge and everything, the spikes and stuff. The casualties, global threat, and I still have love for that music, but you mature along the way, and I think that anyone who really owes it to themselves is you gotta expand to any music that you like. Love the old metal, hardcore stuff. I love like a lot of the alternative, like Slipknot. I grew to love them more from the Resident Evil soundtrack.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I
Hell
got
yeah.
to credit the things like that for movie soundtracks and hey, Tony Hawk, dude, Tony Hawk
Oh,
Pro
Tony
Skater.
Hawk. Yeah, that was just. I mean, that soundtrack's
Uh,
legendary.
Yeah. I wouldn't have known any of the bands. I wouldn't have been in any of them wasn't for Tony Hawk.
Yeah.
Same thing for Resident Evil. I wouldn't have known Slipknot. I wouldn't have known Killswitch Engage. I
That's how
wouldn't
I
have known a
found out
lot of those
about
bands.
Killswitch too. Yeah, I remember I
Yeah.
heard Anna Hardick and I was like, "What? Who is that?"
Yeah. Once the music plays to the credit, I'm like, well, at least that's something nice
Yeah.
compared to all this tragic mishap of my favorite product that you put in this movie.
Well, that's
But
cool, man. That is
yeah.
really cool to hear that history of music and how it kind of transcends through the years and there's just multiple genres. 'Cause that's how music's music, man. It doesn't it's like you like what you like and you expand your horizons with any kind of form of media when it comes to
Mhm.
like games or movies. It's like as you get older, you check out more stuff. You have more of an open mind. You're approaching it a lot differently. So you're like, okay, like let me, you know, find these like desert island records or these desert
Yeah.
island these things that like you could actually really choose a top 10 of different genres or different just because the knowledge starts to starts to take hold. But that's really cool, man. And I think it's cool that you still you have again all that knowledge from doing things through the years and all that experience, and that just it's all for gaining that knowledge for other things that you end up doing, and you're like, all right, now I can just take that, apply it over here, and it makes this a
Mhm.
lot more easier. And it's like you're happy that you kind of had that moment to kind of like learn from that experience, even if like a certain avenue didn't necessarily keep going, or certain like things ended up kind of forming into something else. You're like, all right, like it wasn't for nothing. So
Yeah.
that's
And
really cool to hear for that.
that's how it circles back around the carrier too. Is me and the drummer with Suicide Bombers. That's my other band. We just recorded today, but me and him, we work together. So everything that you hear music wise on Carrier comes from us. If you've seen, so I have two episodes out. There's a pilot episode and episode one. Pilot episode has the theme song intro. If you hear that, that is a song that we wrote in our band that it never left the rehearsal room, and I always wanted to do something with it, so
Oh
we
wow.
did. All the music that you hear, so for instance, in episode one, when we get to Jack's bar, which that's actually, it's not the same recreation of it, but that is the bar from Outbreak. That's what I intended it to be. And just a little side path here. If you remember Jack's Bar, if you look inside it, when you play, the subtitle calls it Jay's Bar. And if you look at the back of the bar, it says Jack's Bar. So that's another classic Capcom move, is not committing to, continuity.
Right.
So I took that and like, you know what? Oh no, here's why it's Jack's Bar and it's also Jay's Bar. It's Jack's Bar, but the neon sign's broken, so that's why it says Jay's Bar and Jack's Bar, but the locals call it Jay's because, you know, it's the lingo of the town.
Yeah, yeah.
So the music that kicks in when you walk in, it's got that heavy slide. That was a song that my drummer made on his own. He played
Wow.
the slide guitar, he played the drums, he played the bass, and he wrote that song long before I got the comic together.
And it was just kind of
And
sitting there on the cutting room
just
floor,
sitting
like
there.
done.
And so, yeah, he was showing me some stuff, and then as he's loading up the program to make it, I'm explaining the comic stuff. He plays that song. Whoa, 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 what the hell was that? It's like, oh, this song? I call it Devil Slide. I'm like, you wrote that? It's like, yeah. That's going in the comic. I don't know where, but we're using it.
It's going somewhere.
And I already have the music lined up for the next episode too, and that's why.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
So I would say Carrier's music is a combination of dirty, like gritty blues, and my fiance kind of coined the term, and kind of like industrial Nine Inch Nails esque type music. So if you hear the closing credits in episode 1,
Definitely.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's like that, yeah.
It definitely fits the vibe, and I think that's really cool that you have, like, again, that soundtrack that's being kind of pieced together by another kind of creative person that you're bouncing these ideas off of, and things
Yeah.
that, like other talented people that can also like lend a hand, and also just kind of have like you guys click already from the band chemistry. So it's like, all right, like, you'll see the final product, and then you guys make a soundtrack for the next episode, and it's like, okay, now we already know, like, we did the first thing that was just like that, like, kind of test run, so to speak, like you mentioned, and then now it's like, now you kind of have a rhythm of like how to cue all that up, and that's awesome, man. That's really cool that you're able to find different way, everything that you've learned you're kind of applying to something like this. And like I said, it really shows that you're putting the time in,
And the beauty
it's
of it
worth
too, it's a bit of a contrast because I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. He's never played Resident Evil, so he's not burdened by wanting to stick within as close to the game as we can. I'll direct that. I'll say, let's make music, and it's doing fine on its own. But let's say I want to have something hone in as a little homage to the original music from the game. I could tell that to him, and he'll play off of my description to it. And I think the outcome of that is great because it's not just a carbon copy of what you hear from the game. It has allusions to it because I'm just merely explaining to him what I want to hear. He has no frame of reference based off of what I told him and his inspirations, and what he makes, it comes out perfectly. And that's like just the way that I think it ties into, when people do live action reinterpretations of Resident Evil. It's just, I don't want to see a carbon copy of it. I want to see something that is an essence of it. Not to get too far off the side path here, but like when they did the remake of Resident Evil 2, was that the same exact RPD from the original one? No. The main hall, compare them side by side, totally different, but still within the same essence of each other. What I like to try to work towards.
Yeah, man, and I think that's the thing too. I think fans appreciate that. I think a lot of people that are, even if they're discovering the things for the first time, and they're like, oh wow, like this is, they could even kind of a watch something like that and be like, okay, this is definitely, it doesn't feel like it's so, like, I don't know, like maybe how it would have felt if you maybe based it in a place like Florida, where it was like more like, it would have felt similar, would have had the vibe, but this really just throws you into that, like that same exact lane that you're used to with Resident Evil, and going into that. And I think that's just captured by how well the pictures, come into play, and how well the artwork looks. I mean, it's something where, playing Max Payne, like obviously with 3, when they started to do the live action, and then they had like, the panel, like it would flash and stuff, the moving panels, I guess you would call them.
Yeah.
It just didn't hit in the same way. Like I felt like I was like, damn, like I kind of just like, I understand it was less is more because it was it was a different era in gaming, and they were able to get away with, that in a simplistic way. And I understand that we've evolved as like, as seeing these cutscenes, but damn, like I do miss those kind of vibes at those cutscenes, because again,
There was
you
a
just fill in
charm
that blank.
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it looked bad, but that was a good thing about it, it had this low quality to it, this low budget look, but that worked for it, and that's what I started to do here. Especially when you look at some of those old panels, some of the poses those guys do in the first game. These aren't actors. These are people that, all right, hey, I want you to stand in this position. They don't know what, half of the time you can tell they don't know what they're doing. Just
No.
be a mean looking mobster, and it's like, yeah. It looks so corny, but it's so on point. And that's why with these panels, I encourage that. I don't know if I sent you the panel for a certain other character with a dungeon. It's another teaser that one is staying hidden.
Okay.
until the episode comes out. But when I had my friend, who's also the guy who plays the character of Chief Irons, is also the drummer in my other band. The only
Oh,
reason I
okay.
worked with him is like, well, I need some dude who's heavy set and kind of has a mustache. I'm like, wait, you're in my band. You have a mustache. Get in
Get
here.
over here.
So when I told him, all right, I need you to be this character, he's barely played the games. The poses he struck were just so like over exaggerated. Like, no, that's perfect. Half the time, sometimes a bit of a wooden performance. Like, no, I need you to look mean. He would just do over exaggerated poses. I'm like, that's perfect because it fits the
That
comic book
aesthetic. Yeah.
appearance of it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's so cool, man. I think like again, people you got to, check out the the episodes that are out there, and of course, the next episode is coming soon from you. What is your experience with the original Resident Evil 4? Were you like all in on RE4 back when it came out? Did you hear about how hype people were about this thing? Like what was you're already following it, at the time, So
yeah.
what was your gateway for RE4?
Oh man, I was all in it from when I first saw the beta images of it, and at the time that it was released, well, it was it was like history repeating itself because I had a PlayStation 2 and I could finally get around to playing the original ones, even though I had them on PC. I got around to playing some of the ones I couldn't play, like Gun Survivor. That was one I really wanted to check out because it was such a sleeper hit, and I didn't have a PlayStation. And then we had the Outbreak series, so now it felt like I finally caught up to Resident Evil. I have a console that I can keep up to date with the games coming out. And all of a sudden, nope, boom, now everything's coming out on freaking GameCube. I thought I got a win with Code Veronica coming out on PS2. Now everything's on the GameCube. Missed the remake and I missed RE4, but I was still keeping up on top of it as best as I could, through any random online article that I could get. So when I saw that we had, we still had the fixed camera angle versions, and now there's this weird fog in the Hookman guy, and Leon's back. That's all I care. Leon was like my favorite character from this was always Chris because I liked the spiky hair, but then when Leon came out, just the way that he had that classic 90s heartthrob look that he to me pioneered the look of the long sleeve shirt with the t-shirt over it
Yeah.
and the long
Yeah.
yeah, nothing beats that for me.
And the Leo
So
DiCaprio hair,
yeah,
like the
and
classic.
once they announced in that early trailer bill that was released, Leon Scott Kennedy or Leon S. Kennedy is back, and he's got that sweet bomber jacket. I was all in, following it, and then when the game released, I just didn't know what the hell it was about because I couldn't read it anywhere. I didn't really read the synopsis either. It's just, all right, it's out. It looks way different than the original promotional material. And then all I know is that, oh, they switched the story. Now you're in Spain and you're working for the U.S. government. That's all I knew about it. So at that point, I was like, well, I guess I just wait for S.T. Perry to write a book on it. But then they finally announced a PlayStation 2 port. And I was hooked. I got that thing for Christmas 2005. Man, I lived in my bedroom at that point. I didn't step out unless for school.
Oh,
Didn't matter.
that
I
summer
didn't.
2005 for me, because I played the GameCube version first. Like
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't find me. I was
Yeah.
addicted. I would close my eyes at night, and I would just see the ammo, like little
Hmm.
like colors and different things. I would
Yeah.
just see it. Like I was just so in it. So I definitely feel you when it comes to like that impact, that instant like addiction that
Yeah.
came with Resident Evil 4.
I loved it. Leon was back. That's all I cared about. I didn't really even mind the whole glossing over of Umbrella. All I cared about it's a new Resident Evil game. It looks fucking great because at that point it's a completely new gameplay mechanic, over the shoulder, and things felt more visceral. I felt like I had more control. This felt new and like I want to play this. I want to aim around like with the controls.
You
This
were
looks
all
so
in,
addicting.
yeah.
I'm all in. And I played that thing start to finish over and over and over and over. Got everything to the point that to this day I still can't play that without doing my loadout, which is I call it the old-fashioned loadout, where I got the bolt-action rifle, the Red 9, and the hunting shotgun with it still got the wooden stock. Anything that's got a wooden stock on it. So, quick little uh, Easter egg point out. In the episode one, I have a cigarette brand. They're called Red Nines, bold and robust flavor. That is my shout out to what I think is the best gun in that game.
Hell
The
yes,
Red
I
9.
agree. I love the Red 9, dude. Me and you have
It
that in
is,
common. That is
yeah.
my favorite gun, favorite handgun.
It's
I
so unique. Yeah, and that it's that bold and robust fucking gunshot sound. It just nothing compares. So
yeah,
always play with that. I know that the Punisher one, it's good for crowd control, but nah, Red 9 all the way.
yep.
So yeah, I played it just back and forth all the time. And the thing that's I am one of those people that will say that marked the turning point in Resident Evil. I would say probably for the worst, because then the focus went elsewhere. I think that the game signified a lot of changes that Capcom acknowledged the wrong changes. The camera angle change, the increase in visceral action, yeah, it needed that. But then the direction of the story with no, let's focus on just stoic, over the top, over exaggerated melodramatic storytelling was just you didn't need to do that. You didn't need to make Chris this chin stoic. We gotta do what's done because it's right type of performances that came after that.
I understand.
Yeah,
Yeah, it started to take that different
yeah,
trilogy. It has a different vibe, and four
and,
is definitely the best of show when it comes
yeah.
to 4, 5, and 6. You know,
I will say that after this, like they got stopped, man. Because with Resident Evil 2 remake, they opened Pandora's box. Because now, how much new content are we getting? We're not. We're getting remakes. So how many more remakes are we gonna get? Do we honestly need any more remakes? I think
that's
we
what a
gotta
lot of
stop
people
after
are
this.
saying.
Yeah,
Yeah, like they're like, where do you go? I mean, a lot of people want Code Veronica. A lot of
I
people
will
want
say,
5
yeah,
again. You know, I don't mind seeing 5. I mean, I don't hate 5. I think 5 has a lot of writing flaws, and I think it's a lot
yeah,
more action tuned up. But I think they can easily do 5 again. They could easily do Code Veronica again. But like you
yeah,
said, I think they have to keep the momentum. So I feel like 9 can easily be announced in June at
yeah,
E3 easily, and they can be like, all right, because I feel like if they were just giving us remakes, maybe it'd be a problem. But I think because they're trying to bounce between the two now, of course, like you said, when does that stop? When does that momentum
yeah,
like kind of hit a wall? And I think, because then to my point to that would also be like, all right, well, yeah, also the main stuff has been hit or miss as well, right? Like now I can say I like 7 over Village, but even like the writing in 7 of Village wasn't as good in my opinion to certain standards. Like not that the writing was like, always S tier in Resident Evil. There was always some flaw or something. Again, we've talked about certain things that have like not been talked about or discussed or missed, right? But there was still a different, a different feeling when we were talking about the older style
yeah,
of those games. So I think with this, it's like they're trying to bounce between the two, and now this is something where like to the point where they didn't even want to. I don't know if you saw like the interviews and stuff leading up to it, but it's kind of like they didn't even want to do it because they're like, how do
yeah,
we do this? Like, how do we approach this? This is like regarded as like the Holy Grail, so it's almost like
yeah,
pissing in the Holy Grail when you're trying to remake it. So they wanted to make it to where like it's kind of like they took 2 years to make this game, and they just said, all right, the last version of RE4 took 2 years. This is just 2 years on top of those 2 years. Like they didn't want to
yeah,
like remove that, but they wanted to add something. And a lot of the stuff, even what I mentioned earlier too, like about like '05 vibes, definitely like 2023 vibes for sure, but more like '05 memories, nostalgia is kind of what I meant to
yeah.
say, right?
No, no, no,
Where
no.
like it
Yeah, I
kind
know
of
what you
brings
meant
you
by that.
back to
Yeah,
that point. You're like, oh
yeah,
man, like it's kind of like it's kind of just like hitting you in the feels a little bit, because I do remember like popping it in for the first time and seeing how like jarring it was to see a different camera angle style.
yeah,
It really was kind of like a kind of completely different coat of paint. And but again, yeah, like I see what you're saying. It's like after this, it's kind of like if this is going to be their pinnacle remake, then like how do you even like top this? If this is going to be topping a Top Dog or trying to reclaim that like that punchiness that the fourth one had, it's going to be hard. I think they'll do it. I think for me, I know a lot of people are going to ask me by the end of it, like, what remake will be my favorite and
yeah,
all this stuff. Like, remake 2002 is still my favorite, but it's because my favorite style of Resident Evil is the fixed camera angles. So I
yeah.
think it's very hard for that to get dethroned.
Mm.
But I'm not going to say never. I'm never, I'm just going to go in with an open mind. But I always appreciated, like how much I kind of had connected to Resident Evil 4. And, I think this remake will. I think as people kind of saw more and more, they're like, okay, I understand why it could be remade. Because there was kind of more of like a hesitation at first, like, do we really want to see that? Like RE4 is kind of like this perfect game. But then when they saw like they saw Leon, they saw the Perry, they saw like all this stuff. They're like, okay, this is, maybe we do need an updated version of this, even though it's been out for or released on a million different
Mm.
platforms. You know what I mean? So I guess there's just a time and a place for them to execute it. And I think when RE2 came out, that was their time to say, all right, like let's do this now, because that knocked down the doors. Now you got Silent Hill being remade and Dead
Yeah,
Space being
exactly.
remade. Like Resident Evil again is kind of like knocking down the doors for people to say, okay, maybe we should just approach this thing. Now again, it falls into that category of like there's no new material. So
Yeah.
where is that coming out? It's kind of like the movie mentality. It's like you're remaking these movies, but where's the new shit? And it's the same thing. So I think there has to be you have to make fans happy on both ends, and I feel like it's very like it just depends, because there's fans that just like the remakes, don't care about the new games. They like everything, or they just like the original. Like there's different
I
pockets.
was hoping that with this one they would take a bit more of a creative liberties on their approach to telling at least a story, because I just feel like with the remake of 4, they're pigeonholing themselves by way of how they're going to flesh out the characters. So, because look at it, we got a new interpretation of Leon. I mean, Leon from Resident Evil 2, still, I still think that's the best Leon, only because I don't feel like he's been topped on that end. But
Right.
with Resident Evil 2 remake, they now have the chance to go back and really get more into the mindset of how, let me ground this character. How would someone in his position really, let's get actual acting directions given to how a young guy who's his first day on the job, what would they really be like in a more grounded, realistic scenario? And great, so that's a completely different Leon. So I would like, you show me a new character. I want to see how that character is naturally going to organically grow. Instead, now we have to somehow shoehorn that Leon into becoming this, you know, tough, wisecracking, you know, badass character that he is in Resident Evil 4. And I realize in the remake they're going to try to make it more reflective of the character that he was in the second remake. But still, it's like you're funneling this character away from a natural growth into a character that I don't know. I just don't feel like it's an organic growth for him, who he was in Resident Evil 2 to who he is in Resident Evil 4 remake. It's just it feels like it's still a bit forced into this over the top bravado that he might embody, which I know in the videos that release he's a bit more restrained than that compared to how he was in the original. But it's like you made this new character, so to speak, this new version of Leon. Let's see him in something that we haven't seen him in yet. Then let's take that story in a different direction. But it's just we're going now with this Resident Evil 4 remake. So it just felt like there was like a lack of growth there. It's like they're limiting themselves on it.
I see what you're saying. Did you feel like they also did that in the original as well because of the style of gameplay? Because
Yeah,
they were amping it up, and they even put in the laser scene from the movie. Like they were using all these
yeah,
things that made it action. So like, well, we just got to make act like Leon over the top action, and he's flipping
yeah.
off walls, and he's suplexing shit. Like I guess that's just all directly from what they changed about him. I guess so. I guess
Yeah,
there's you know
but back then it made sense because the source material that you were going off of was pretty bare bones at the time either.
that
It's
that's
like,
true. It was, yeah.
yeah.
There wasn't as many games as
And
there are now.
sometimes that kind of approach can work. Like for instance, you ever seen the Mad Max movies?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
absolute favorites of mine. So look at the transition from Mad Max 1 to Mad Max 2. Completely, no one would have ever seen that coming.
No.
But hey, it worked. You see the first movie, it's some weird amalgamation of what they thought the future would be like. Going to just now we have this post-apocalyptic wasteland where everyone's walking around in leather bondage gear fighting over gasoline. It's like it's such an absurd approach and direction for the story, but it works. So sometimes that approach can work. Sometimes it just feels like I don't know where we went with it. But for Resident Evil 4, the direction they went on, yeah, it worked because what came from beforehand, there wasn't much. So you did have more free space to build off of. But, then again, they did tease us with those original builds of a more gothic, darker world. And I still think that you wouldn't have had a big response, as big a reaction as the one as it is now.
Right.
But I still think that would have been better story wise if they'd gone in that direction.
Yeah, that's the one thing too. Like I just think like what could have been like a lot of people wanted to see 3.5 elements, but they're not putting them in obviously, which is like that's fine.
Yeah.
I think
I mean,
that I
to a
think
degree they can. But
right. That's the thing too. Like I think a lot of people remember the Hook Man and
yeah.
the doll heads falling off and stuff like that. Like I remember seeing that. Oh man, it was on like a thing called. You remember G4 TV back in the day?
Oh my God,
Back in the
yes.
day.
Oh
We're
yeah.
not going to
Oh
talk
yeah.
about what happened a few years ago. We're going to talk about back in the
No.
day.
I
Man,
remember when it was still called Tech TV.
Tech TV, and there was a show
Yeah.
called Cinematech, and it was a bunch of
Cinema
weird.
Tech. It was just trailers.
It was just trailers. That's it.
Yeah.
And I saw, it was always weird anime games, weird like different things, and then I saw Resident Evil, the early like the fog trailer or the
Yeah.
the possession trailer, and I was like, what is this? I've never seen this ever. At the time, this is probably like 2006. I was like, what the hell is this? And then I was like, I was blown away because I was obsessed with this game, and I've never saw anything like that before. YouTube was around, but it was very, I don't know if that footage was probably on like websites and GameSpot back
yeah, it was
then.
like Angel Fire, all that stuff.
Exactly, like old school
Yeah.
stuff. But I just wasn't like, I didn't have the knowledge back then of like, oh, I can find this stuff. So when I would find a lot of stuff out, it was be through that channel. But yeah, that's the first time I saw the earlier versions, and I was like, that is wild. And then, yeah, I just think Resident Evil 4 for me. I know it's always going to be kind of like it started a certain trend, and that it also like it never quite captured. RE4, like I said, after you do RE2, and RE2 is emulating RE4, and then you get up to what you're trying to re-emulate in these remakes, which is from that formula. Now you have to you're really up against some challenges. As RE fans, I was gonna say, yeah, like it's always fun kind of shooting the shit about it, and always like just kind of seeing the different opinions that people have and where they came into the franchise as well. A lot of people that watch the channel, like they started with 4 or 5 now. It happens because there's so many years pass. People try to get in in that that entry point somewhere, and it's always got to be either a remake or a mainline game. So if it can open the door for more people, even if they got into it with Village and they go back and they find the originals and the remakes, like that's all good because it shows where it came from. You know what I mean? And some people might appreciate that. Some people might be like, I'm not really into the fixed camera angle stuff. But there's just sometimes the simplicity of that is really is
I
what
always
makes it work.
I always love coming across people who like they got into the later games and then they researched the older games and they actually love what they saw so much. And because I have those moments too. There's things where I get into it and you see like a modern day game. I'm trying to think of an example, but you just a game that has a long standing franchise and you just go to the beginning of who these characters were and you see just how much, not just the gameplay wise but story wise, how much these characters have come over time. So when he's played the games now and they see Leon or say Chris, by way of Resident Evil 6 or even the movies, and you go back and you see who Chris was in Resident Evil 1, you're like, wow,
Before
that's
the
what
boulder.
that guy used to be. Yeah.
Before the boulder, pre
Before the
boulder,
boulder, yeah.
And yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that's why a lot of people like to see the characters like come back, or if they bring Jill back in Death Island, which is the CGI film that's coming out in the summer. For me, like I'm a huge mark for Jill, so I'm waiting, and I'm sure you are too. So like seeing her come back in the first story. Not RE3 doesn't count in terms of remake because that's 98 Jill. Like current Jill post RE5 is what we're going to see, and hopefully it's it's something seeing Jill on the big screen. I'm there. Like you got me day one. Like I'm going to be there. So I'm happy they're still utilizing some of these characters. Some of them are written a little bit differently, or some of them change because of the continuity thing we talked about earlier. But I'm happy at least so far the remakes have at least kept. They haven't like butchered the characters entirely, like for example, like RE3, I think they did Carlos a little bit better in the remake. I still like OG Carlos, don't get me wrong, but I do think Jeff Shine brought a nice little, touch to Carlos there, like little things like that, they did a little bit better.
He really did a fantastic job on that. That's one of those things where my only gripe with was I just thought the UBCS outfits looked a little bit bland compared to the previous ones. It's like it doesn't look as stand out. But performance-wise and look-wise, like, that was, I didn't think there's plenty of room we could improve on Carlos, but I always liked his cheesy corniness. And for me, his character made more sense to me because I knew I was basing him off of S.D. Perry's characterization of him. But yeah, that's a perfect example, and I felt like Carlos is still someone that we should get a game for.
I wouldn't mind.
I discussed this to other people, just like see if I can tell this really quick. But a side story spinoff focused exclusively on Carlos. Let's say he's working for the BSAA now. He got an in through Joe with Chris. Chris contacts him. This is an entire story that I just think would be great. Chris contacts him, and he's like, "Hey, BSAA has really got me restrained on a lot of things, and there's a lot of activity going on in South America right now. We got reports of BOW activity. I'm putting together an operation under the books, under the table, off the books, off the record. I want you and a three-man team. I want you in charge of the team. I need you guys to go down there to South America and check out what's going on." And so the setup is Carlos and a small detachment of BSAA do a recon team to South America into the jungles, because we never had a jungle setting in Resident Evil with the exception of Operation Javier, but
Right.
that's on rails. And if you've ever been in the jungle, man, the jungle can be terrifying. At night in the middle of the rain, I'd spent a week out in the Amazon as a kid. It can be fucking scary.
That is wild, man.
So have them go down there. They go to check out BOW activity, but it's in heavily patrolled areas of drug cartel militias. So that's why no one wants to touch the area. It's hot zone for all sorts of, rebel activity. But in between those drug encampments, there's a drug den it's on the surface level, it's a drug den, but it's secretly a BOW operation. So imagine that you have a three-way battle system where you go in with a small team, you got to keep an eye out for any gunfights with cartel drug gangs in the area, and also put up with fighting BOWs in the jungle at night in the rain. Just that would be such a great setup and a good way to bring Carlos back.
That's actually not a bad idea. That's like probably the best way I've ever heard someone kind of pitch like an idea to keep Carlos in.
Yeah.
Because that's like that's something that would work, because it's like unless he really just stopped the whole like, I'm going to be on the front lines after 3, I feel like he
Yeah.
would want to try to fight more and make that kind of more justified of like to stop like what BSAA was set out to do before it got turned
Yeah.
into whatever it was at the end of Village. Like, you want to make it to where like we could fill that in, like, maybe we could start seeing the inner unravelings of BSAA, at that point, if they did a spin-off game like that. It's always something that'd be really cool. Or just to see Carlos and Jill see each other again would be very crazy, because it's like, he was kind of like your guy when you left. Like,
Yeah.
he helped each other. So it's like, what, that would be like, I don't know. That would be pretty dramatic, to be like, through all that stuff, Raccoon City, you lose your home, what's going on, and then, you're only there with a couple people or one other person that, if you count Barry as well, depending on the ending,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
still just like it. I miss when certain characters were, I guess like there was still a chance for them to be used again. And then as
Yeah.
we got further away from Carlos in the original, or like someone like even, people joke about Billy nowadays, right? But as we got further away from those characters, they just never really were talked about again, or even like Helena in 6, or, it's just like little things like that where you're like, okay, they're there, but what could they do with a remake, or a remake timeline? What could they do with these characters? And I think they at least set them up where they could have, still bring them back in another way. But it's just a matter of like, again, will they continue to bring in characters that I guess circle back around or know each other? There's always like a weird, like, we're jumping around to year to year, different years
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Like, it's always so all over the place. So like, like even this one takes place at the Death Island, 2017, before 7, and it's like, okay, so this is before 7 now, and now we're seeing Rebecca in there, and again, and Chris and Jill and Leon. So I think I think there's a lot of cool things they can do going forward with like still keeping our old characters around if they're older, and new characters as well. Like, I'm not saying don't do any new characters, only do the old characters, as long as those new characters feel more of an identity over what the Winters had, which for me wasn't I wasn't
Yeah.
really satisfied with that.
No, dude. When it comes to to Ethan and Ethan Winters and that character, I mean he could have been a good character, but I feel like wasn't part of the intention of keeping him on was They didn't want to show his face. They wanted to keep most of his characteristic obscure because they wanted to get the impression of like the player is a character by way the same
Yes.
reason you don't Gordon Freeman doesn't have a voice. I felt like that was mentioned in development, but if you're gonna do that, you have to commit to that. That way, that meaning Ethan can't have a voice. We have to have no indication this guy's a personality because that's going to be us. That's why Gordon Freeman in Half-Life works so well. So the minute that you start giving him a personality and he talks, he has his own line delivery. Okay, well, he's a character. We have to see more of this character. And then the weird decision they had of just showing cutscenes in Village to the point that you're excluding his face or deliberately hiding his face in shadow at points. It's what's that? There's no sense with that. If he's a character, show him already. Let the weight of that character's representation go all the way. Otherwise, it's this weird. I can't relate to him because
Right.
I don't know if he's a character or if he's supposed to be me. So he could have been great. It was just it wasn't executed well, and I still think that Capcom can bring in new characters. Just give all out, or if it's supposed to be the player, then commit to it. That's all I say. Just commit to whatever the idea is.
Yeah, that is a really good point because it just seems like when they tried to make Ethan more likable or relatable, it ended up just being like, okay, like they at that point the writing in Village already was kind of showing a lot of holes and it was very much confusing. So it's like by the time they circled back around and they're like, oh, we got to make Ethan this character now, fuck, and it was like it
Yeah,
just seemed like they were just kind of like grasping for straws there, you know.
exactly.
But one last thing I wanted to bring up before we wrap things up here is, the recent news. I haven't really bounced this around off of anybody, so I was like, perfect. You wanted to talk about it anyway. Was the rumblings, Sean, of another live action Resident Evil film. Screen Gems and Sony, they love the big bucks. They don't care if there's box office flops, if they can take the hits. And Resident Evil is still going strong in terms of a franchise. So there's been rumblings of this. There's been talks of them continuing this. I just want to hear your initial reaction to this after being pretty much checked out after the Netflix series, which is what you said before we started here, as well as Welcome to Raccoon City. Even though again, we all have different opinions on the films that are watching or listening to this, but what is your I guess we should preface this by like, how was your last meetings with Welcome to Raccoon City and RE Netflix? Were you just kind of like, I'm done after this? Like, what was your I guess we'll start with Welcome to Raccoon City because that came out first.
Dude, I tried. I was one of those people that defended the film online. I was seeing so many people calling out things that like I naturally would have pointed like, hey, the writing's already on the wall, and I was one of those people. Oh, did you already see the movie? Huh? Oh, you saying they destroyed Claire's character? Really? Where's the evidence? Oh, based off of one picture that you saw.
Right.
So you must have seen the movie already then.
People
Oh,
jumping the
was
gun. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I had just gotten back into it. Like I had been out of Resident Evil for years, and now the remake came out. Now the announcement of the movie, and I saw the set pieces of the RPD gate, and I saw who they casted as Chris, which I didn't agree with the other casting, but still whatever. It's like, all right, they can still act the part maybe. I was just getting back into what I love. Damn it, I'm gonna defend it to some degree. And then when the movie came out, it's like there's no defending this. It was I will say after giving it some time, it tried. It tried to stay relevant to its source material. And if you look at it, it didn't do the cardinal sin that Paul Anderson's film did, which was introduce a bunch of characters that are unrelated to the games. Every character in Welcome to Raccoon City is from the game, but that's about as far as it goes. I will say that Johannes just bit off more than he can chew. He definitely should have just kept it with one game. One game, just focus on the mansion. That's it. Do it the same way that the game did. Don't mention anything about don't show Raccoon City. Start us in the chopper, get us in the mansion, and end us in the chopper, just like in the game. That's it. Netflix series, I didn't. One episode, I was done. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
get
I
that
was gonna
far
say,
into it.
I don't blame people. Some people were when they watched my review, they're like, all right, that's all I needed
Yeah.
to see, And I'm like, yeah. I mean, I try to. I put in the time. I sat there like it was like 10 p.m. or something like that, and I literally stayed up to like 4. Like, I watched this thing. I was like, let me just take notes, and I'm just seeing this on. I was watching this, and I'm just like, they have to stop. These live action things have to stop. Like, they just have to stop.
Yeah.
But I knew deep down, I knew it, because again, Screen Gems and Sony, like, they just love, you know, the money and the you know, the white powder or something, because they are off the charts with like their crazy wild ideas, and it's not in a good way. It's just like, I feel like there's always these weird like business moves that either A, mess up the movies that we're supposed to get, or B, they just have a shitty idea from the start. Now, I know there's people that are going to be listening to this and watching this and saying, well, you know, Johannes wanted to do this and he wanted to do that, and I get that, but now we're just kind of stuck with what we got, and I feel like there's only so many excuses you can make at the end of the day. I think that like that script was just a lot on the plate for an hour and 40, you know, minutes that it was. And I think, and I agree, like watching back a second time, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, like there is things that I can appreciate, right? Like when they enter the mansion, or where they enter the you know, the outskirts in the Arklay Forest, like that stuff is, that's you know, it's like, damn, like if they just were focusing on a movie with just the mansion incident, and they had, you know, they had things that they can just kind of, you know, lead into RE2, like even if you didn't know that you were going to have a sequel set up or whatever. I just think they got a little too excited with like being like, all right, we're all in on making it just like the games, and then they tried to put in, you know, all that stuff and a flying cow, and you know, they did all that stuff at the end, you know, and I can't forget about the flying cow. But I think there's a lot of things that I understand, you know, why some people, again, like they looked at it as somewhat of a breath of fresh air from what we got with the last, at least the last like 3 or 4 Anderson films. You know, so I think people want to either see, you know, I don't know what people want to see. Like, what do you think fans actually want to see in terms of like, do we do Code Veronica next in this movie? Do they do 4? Like, they're not going to follow Welcome to Raccoon City. Like, what do you think? What would you even want to see at this point? If you know, the live action is going to happen inevitably, and we're just got to sit there and see it happen. Like, what would you want to see as a fan, really? I'm curious.
Is it something that would have to fall off of whatever already been established? Like, is the limitation be like, what do I want to see, but based on continuing off of already existing stuff, or like a completely new thing?
Just new, like clean slate, and maybe they would, you know, I don't know if the studios would go for maybe like something they just did because it just got done.
Yeah.
Like maybe not 1 and 2, but like, would you even approach 1 again and be like, just do 1 just by itself?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, well, that's kind of what Carrier is that's my approach to that. That's essentially is my answer to that. But my honest fan answer, because I still want to see those stories. You can, people that say you can't tell those stories on a movie, it's a game. You can still tell those into a movie format.
Yes.
It's just a question of, everyone's trying to adapt. Don't adapt it to the screen, translate it to the screen. Get the game, translate it to how it would behave in visual movie language. It's all language transition. The game's a video game, that's a language. Movie is a different language. How do you translate this? Example, you know, I use this. Sin City is the best translation of a comic to a movie in my idea, because it's literally page for page the same movie, the same panels, the same action, the same everything put to the big screen, but by a way that works visually. I'm not saying take the damn, you know, puzzle every single, like moving the stairs in front of the statue to get the
every
map
nook and
for,
cranny. Yeah.
No, and that's why S.D. Perry already did the work there. My thing that I would see live action is this: the first movie. Let's not fuck around with this. Let's just make this a standalone movie. Don't set up. No intention for setting up a cinematic universe. Throw that out the damn door. Don't go at this movie like this is the only movie you are going to make of Resident Evil. That's it, because you set yourself up for failure if you have to set up these little hints, these little, you know, information bombs that will only pay off later down the line of sequel. Don't. The movie, like I said, start in the helicopter, give us a big exposition rundown of what's going on, get us right into the action, just like the game, and then have us exploring the mansion to a degree of what the characters would explain, break us off, find ways to make that narrative expand. It's not impossible. For instance, why it's a mansion. Why are we not hearing gunshots
Yeah.
on the other side of the mansion? Okay, hey, this is a mansion that's also attached to a laboratory. Maybe they have blast wall thick walls to prevent contamination to some degree. Maybe they're so thick it dampens the noise. That's why we can't hear anyone. There are so many things. If you just take some time to think about it, you can make that story thick and rich with just actual narrative storytelling, and then end it by way of the same way as the game. Blow up the lab, get on the chopper, fly off into the sunrise.
Give us
That's
Barry,
it.
give us Rebecca, give us the
Give
characters
us.
we didn't get.
Don't
right?
screw around. Just give us what the fans are not asking for much. Give us the characters. Just give it to us. It's not hard. You tried with Welcome to Raccoon City, but you didn't really. You didn't do it the right way.
You
Come
kept
on,
jumping
man. Like,
around and really
yeah,
didn't give us any chance to like relax. Like I even like by
yeah.
the time I saw the ending of like the tram and everything, and Leon's like found it in first class, like doing the rocket launcher thing. I was like, where? I was like, we are already here at the end. I was like, this movie is just going like boom, boom,
Yeah,
boom, and that's okay, but not when you have two different things you're bouncing back to, like where he was like, oh well, we're trying to. I was really inspired by Assault on Precinct 13 and all this. Like he kept saying these things, and I'm like, stop doing that. Stop
yeah,
saying that because it's not. You're not John Carpenter. Number one, and number two,
yeah.
like this is not like. It just wasn't the right time to do something like that with a movie that was like. Sure, if it went over 2 hours, people would have complained. But like you said, you didn't have to set up this crazy universe because then we get the
No.
cliffhanger with Ada and naked Wesker, and that is going nowhere now. It's
Yeah.
like, he's sitting there naked with sunglasses on, and you're like, is this really going to go to 2? Is this, or like not 2, Code Veronica or 4? Like, I can't even see them, like when talks of like continuing Johannes like that, even if he doesn't take over as like filmmaker, like that universe just, I think it's like it's just dead. It just hit a wall.
Yeah.
Like you didn't even have a tyrant. You didn't have a hunter. You didn't have these things that are so iconic in the mansion. And I understand like even the Raccoon City destruction, which is like one of my favorite scenes in gaming ever because it's my favorite game of all time. That is my favorite ending. That just didn't hit like it should have. I mean, an Apocalypse it had the same effect where like it just didn't feel like it had that like that hit.
Yeah.
And the narration at the end and the newscaster, like all that stuff was just so well done in the original 3. But I don't know. I just think that, yeah, I agree with you, man. I think me and you are on the same page when it comes to like, if they're going to do this again, you got to do the Spencer Mansion right. Please
Yeah.
don't just try to jump right into RE4 because that's like, the shit right now because it's getting remade. And, yes, has it been done on screen before? No. So you would be doing something, new, but like we didn't even get past 1998 yet without flaws, let alone
So,
jumping out of that, that timeline there.
yeah, my 2 cents on the rumors of a Resident Evil 4 movie is, first of all, I would describe it as unearned. It's unearned. We did not get anywhere near the way of a cinematic established path to get to whatever this movie, if that is the case, that's what they're going to make. There's nothing to establish what it is, and I seriously doubt that this is going to be a continuation or have any kind of affiliation to what Welcome to Raccoon City did. I think they're smart enough to see that it would be a bad gamble. The people, if they're going to make a movie, they're going to want to. You have the remake coming out.
Exactly.
You don't want to put that much negative attention on you when you have the character that he casted as Ivan Yogia. He's not a bad actor. I've seen his other stuff. It's just I think they did him a disservice casting with that and not warning him what could happen.
Yeah,
But to
it
see
made him a
him,
goof, right?
yeah,
Like he wasn't
yeah,
like
made him a goof.
Yeah, like that's not
Yeah,
Leon wouldn't shoot his partner,
no,
and
shoot as far no.
no.
But for that character to go on and be the face of Resident Evil 4, we have the remake coming out, so now it's fresh in everyone's mind what Leon looks like. And then what's the given state of the climate of things today, to have that, here's the game that's just recent and fresh in everyone's mind, and here's the movie, and the counterpart looks nothing like that. You're just inviting more negative backlash, unless their secret intention is to have something by way of what they did with that Velma show.
Right?
Which is, they want the hate because hate still generates money, but I don't see it that way. The way if they do it, it's going to be a completely unrelated movie, and then it's going to be something where your only chance of understanding it is if you have to have played the games. You have to have played 4. You have to have played the games leading up to it to know where the hell this movie's going to go. And that's not how you do a movie. You have to go into it treating your audience thinking that, hey, they have no idea what this, even if it's based off a product, you have to treat the audience knowing that from the start, they don't know what's going on, but treat them with the respect that they can figure it out for themselves. So don't hold their hand along the way. Don't drop exposition after exposition on them like they did in Welcome to Raccoon City.
Yeah.
The scene I hate the most is when, Leon, excuse me, sir, but what's a Spencer mansion? And an iron starts off as, well, as you all know,
Yeah.
the founder of Umbrella, Spencer, like, that is script writing, storytelling, bad 101. And that's what you have to do when you're so limited with a tight constraint. And you don't think your audience is going to be able to connect the points on their own. You can't do that. So that's why no matter what they do with the 4, if this is going to be a Resident Evil 4 film, it's dead out the gate in my opinion.
Yeah, man, I agree. I think you put it so well when like it hasn't been earned. There isn't that like that one that built up to it, or those 2 films or whatever that built up to the events post a Raccoon City destruction, where we have the story that was told. And of course it's like they always have to throw in stuff to try to tell it to people that haven't played the games, but it's like, why do you got to act like we're idiots, you know what I mean, as well, because fans are also going to be watching it, so you also don't want them to feel like idiots. And there's a way to do it to where you can still tell it in a way where, okay, maybe it's more confusing when you bounce back and forth between RE1 and RE2 in one film than just saying like, okay, mansion, infection, go. Like that's more like anyone that's casually watching that, it's like, okay, I've heard of Resident Evil, but like I know about the mansion, maybe. Like anyone going into it that doesn't know about it, like they can at least still follow it. But I feel like if you're a casual fan and like you're watching this, or Welcome to Raccoon City, for example, it's dancing around so fast, and you're just like, I feel like it's hard to follow. Like I'm curious if like anybody, like it's obviously it's in my life, it's hard to find like just casual Resident Evil fans. Like I'm surrounded by a lot of people that are passionate about it, and I'm friends with people that love it. So it's hard to like talk to somebody that just like went, there's been some people in the chat as well that I've seen before, but it's hard to just find a person that just has like no bias, like going into it and like seeing if they genuinely think it's like a good movie and paced well. Anybody that's in the films is probably going to be like, no. If
that was me. When we went and saw the movie in theaters, I had like about 7 or 8 people with me. And I think maybe like 3 or 4 out of them, myself included, actually were fans of the game. And to the point that, the scene where they first enter the mansion and they split up, they go in every single opposite direction that you wouldn't go in the game. In the game, you go left.
Yeah.
And one goes right and one goes up the stairs. And me and the other girl that was watching it with us, we just leaned forward. Why is no one going the... we noticed that, but everyone else in the theater just had no idea what was going on up until that point. To the point that one of my buddies that watched it with me, he kept poking me. He's like, "Hey, where are the raccoons? Where are the raccoons here?" Well, yeah, you're just being a dick, but I get you. You're being
Yeah.
But no, by the end of it, I asked some of the people who never played the game, like, "Well, what did you think of it as a movie?" And they're like, "I don't even know what the hell were those zombies? Did they turn it? How'd they become? Were they just the town just got sick? How? No one fucking knows." So
yeah, and then they try to do the whole thing where they're just like, oh well, the water supply, and it was already kind of an abandoned town because people started to leave. Like that's not. I like that everything happened when everyone was still in the town, and there wasn't like a warning. There was that struggle, that panic. We all have read, hopefully, the Zombie Survival Guide. We know how that can happen in a panic and where people would go to and rush to, and it would be a police station. That's like one of the places you avoid if something like that ever happens. That's what the Zombie Guide tells you, right? But it's also just like, I miss that urgency of like, we are screwed. Like the beginning of RE3, perfect example. Like you're seeing that happen. Barricades are being broken down. It's chaos, and I think you lost that flair of that like kick up in the city when everything was like, well, people kind of left and it was kind of abandoned, and it's like it just didn't do anything for me, man. Like I just don't. They tried different things, and I'm like, why did you do that? Like, you didn't have to do
Yeah.
that. You could have just made it the same, you know?
So here's the thing for me when it comes to that depiction of like of the outbreak in Raccoon City in general in the movie. To me, Raccoon City is a city. I wouldn't say it's a city as big as like the likes of Chicago or so. In Carrier, it kind of is, only so I can work with that noir aesthetic,
Sure.
so you can have the big cityscape. But to me, Raccoon City is a town that's too big to be a town, but not just big enough to still be a city.
Yeah,
So not something with a subway, but still that you would have a downtown area with a couple of tall buildings.
definitely.
Perfect example, and I've said this many times before, just look it up. Charleston, West Virginia. That I drove through there. And the minute that we came around the highway on the side of it, I was just exhausted from being in the car for hours. We were driving all the way up to Ohio. I look out the window, I immediately perked up. We had Country Road playing. You know, it's on Country Road,
Yeah, yeah.
Take Me Home. Once the peak of that chorus hits, it was like the skyscrapers pulled up and the music synced up with us seeing the city. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm looking around like that's Raccoon City. We drove around it, and the freaking police station down there looks like it could have been a church slash museum at some point.
And this is West Virginia, you said?
Charleston, West Virginia. Yeah.
Wow.
So that to me is what it looks like. What they did in the movie? No, that is not what I think. However, if that's how you're gonna play it, commit to it. So Raccoon City is a small town. Okay, fine. Show us that small town. Because what do we see of it? We see maybe a billboard and a couple of houses, and then all of a sudden, boom! Out of nowhere is this giant fucking police station that sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
Like, if you're gonna make a small town, make a small town police station then. If it's the RPD, fine, make it small, but let it have an essence of the original RPD. So let's say it's a small place, you walk in, it's not a giant main hall. However, there's a statue in the middle that looks similar to what we saw in the game. The way the room is set up, the wood, the coloring, it's like in essence, it's in the same language as the original RPD, but it's not. Instead, they just here's a small town, and then boom, yeah, we got the blueprints to build it. But no, it's just green screen, and we just straight up drop the freaking game onto this green screen. Someone just ripped the assets from the RE engine and dropped it onto a green screen background. That's exactly what it looked like, and it just felt lazy, shoehorned, and it
Right.
had no resonance or any weight.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. Definitely. Like I said, there was a couple cool shots in Welcome to Raccoon City, no doubt. There was a couple things that looked cool, but I agree with the town, man. I think that was a very lazy approach, and I think if they
Yeah.
had a move like where a movie was one game and the second movie was the second game, then you would have all that time, or even the third, if they put that into some kind of like connection, you would have all that time to show the city and show the detail. Instead, it's like we're like as soon as you get a glimpse of something and you want to see more, we're cutting over here. And as soon as you see,
Yeah.
it's like I wanted a little bit more of that, and you didn't. It was doomed from the start. But I think at least when if they, again, us fans, like it doesn't hurt us. These live actions, they just come out and we see them. Like people like me, I review them for you guys, even if they're crappy. But we're always going to see them as fans, and I know that might be part of the problem, which is why they make money.
Yeah.
But it's
That's-
we have to see. I mean, I feel like we're obligated to check it out and let our voices be heard, even if it's not a, it's not a I don't know, like a something that even needs to be, I guess, addressed, because most people that are going to be seeing it probably won't think about the things that we see or feel, which is the case for the Anderson movies, which is why they made a gazillion dollars. But I just think, man, like if they're going to approach this again, I would want them to just wait longer, but they
Yeah.
can't because
No.
the time is now. They're like now, the momentum, they see RE, snapping, it's selling like crazy. It's Capcom's highest selling IP as of now. So it's like, I think they're just going to keep it going, but man, I wish they would just stop. Like between, Johannes' effort and the show, it's like, dude, we got too much back to back already. So we
Yeah.
might as well just give it like a 5-year wait, but they're not going to do that. So I'm curious to see what we actually hear. If it's going to be Code Veronica, is it going to be 4? Is it going to be 1 again? Is it going to be another? I don't know. Like who is going to approach it? Who are they going to, I know James Wan, probably it was probably going to be more RE7 when he was involved in the project. That was the rumblings, is that's what they wanted but they didn't see that being, oh well, who the fuck's gonna watch a movie about that? Like, people think Resident Evil, they're thinking the mansion, they're thinking RPD,
Yep.
but then they didn't even do that right. So I don't who knows where the live action stuff is, but at least we have we have another form of media to consume that is Resident Evil, and that that is Carrier, a Raccoon City Story, bringing it all full circle. But I just want to say thanks again, man, for coming on here and just shooting the shit. This is a great discussion. I love talking, picking your brain about your creative process and just hearing what you're into, what gets you inspired, and doing things DIY. Hopefully that also shows people that you can do a lot of stuff with just a small little team, or a lot of stuff on your own too, like just by just doing it, learning it, and trying to take a lot of experiences from, if it's something that you're passionate about, whatever it may be, it can apply and you can make it work. And
Yeah.
it's really cool that you're what you're doing with Resident Evil, something that, and Max Payne, like those loves of old gaming kind of shine through in your current work. And that's awesome, man. It's a great thing. And of course, like I'd love to have you back on anytime to just talk or promote the stuff. So I don't know if, obviously, like I know we mentioned this a little bit, but when did you want to let people know when they can expect the next episode, or did you I want you to kind of put whatever information you want out there, and obviously let people know where they can find you and all your efforts.
You can find the channel on YouTube. It's Carrier Raccoon City Story. Again, you can find me on Facebook. Same thing, full name. Instagram, Carrier_1998. And Twitter, Carrier_1998. I tend to kind of hang around Twitter a bit more, just posting goofy stuff and keeping up to date on everything. So, yeah, there's all the social handles. You want to find them there. And trust me, when the episode is ready to drop, the word will spread.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the one thing I love about it is the the anticipation's always nice with projects like this, where it has it had such a nice hit when it came out, and now it's like everyone's just kind of waiting, and like you said, the people that are gonna really watch it and look for it, they're gonna be satisfied with it, and it's gonna be something that's gonna be worth the wait, man. And it's cool.
I'm still waiting on people to spot some of the Easter eggs I posted in the first episode. Like, I posted a reference to JoJo's Bizarre Adventures.
Ah, okay.
Because I remember playing Resident Evil 2 and seeing the locker there and it just says JoJo. I'm like, who the hell's JoJo? And it's a reference to that show. So obviously I had to pay it forward. And if you're someone who's watching or listening right now, watch episode 1, see if you can find JoJo.
Yeah, that's what's cool about it, like going back, and even I probably miss certain things, when watching it. So I always like to go back, and again, it has a certain, like, I just love the I don't know how to explain the vibe of what you're doing on Carrier, but it just reminds me of just, nighttime, cold, very gritty. Like, it has that like cold aesthetic to it, very much like Max Payne. And I just love it, man. I just love what you're doing, and just keep up the great work, and I really appreciate you coming on and just shooting the shit with me. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, man. Again, a big thanks to you for having me on. Any opportunity I can to talk about Resident Evil, and especially outside of Resident Evil, like Max Payne, I'm all for it.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, definitely. You're gonna have to do this again. Like I said, and also a couple other ideas I wanted to bring you in on when we discuss some of the books, which will be happening eventually, like I said. So because it's something I've never covered on the channel, but I always wanted to, and I'll keep everyone posted on that as well. But yeah, guys, so thanks again for watching. Everyone that is watching this on YouTube or listening to it on Spotify, iTunes, Libsyn, it's all on that stuff. Or I'm sorry, Apple Podcasts, that's what it's called now. Yeah, that's it, guys. So thanks again for watching the LTRE podcast, and thanks again, Sean, and I will catch everyone in the next one. Take care.
So long, Internet.